we're back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me as always, Kevin Durso. Kevin, how are you, buddy?
I'm all right. Been a week, but
A little tired.
I mean, for a whole bunch of different reasons, but yeah.
Well, we do have a lot to get into, and before we dive into that, make sure to follow us on social media at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcasts, including sportstalkphilly.com. Okay, diving right into it, as promised from last week's show, if you stuck around, it is the trade deadline show here, and the Flyers were active participants. Quite frankly, in terms of being on both sides of things, all three sides of things, basically every role a team can play in the trade deadline, the Flyers did it.
Right.
Let's start off with the first deal. Comes down on Wednesday. Ended up being maybe the biggest deal of the week. Sean Walker.
For them, yeah.
Yeah. Sean Walker and a 2026 5th round pick to the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for Ryan Johansson with half his salary retained, and a 2025 first round pick that can slide to 2026 if it's in the top 10, but I don't really expect to see Colorado stumble at any point. So a pick in the late half of the 2025 draft. Kevin, where are you at on this one? What do you think?
That it's great that they got what they wanted. I mean, that's pretty much straight up what it is. I mean, I get it. Like, you don't love trading Sean Walker for the performance level he had this year. There was that back and forth of, do you keep him and sign him to an extension? Do you trade him? I think they got this one right. I wouldn't have signed him to some long-term extension, especially some of the numbers that were out there. I think the numbers that were kind of floated were like either 4 or 5 years and in the 4.5 to 5 million range. That is complete opposite of what you're trying to accomplish.
Correct.
So the fact that you went out and, in fairness to, trying, between, do you sign him? Do you trade him? Because I think they would have tried to sign him more, like they would have gone harder on that if the possibility of a first wasn't out there.
I agree.
So because of that, like, it really took playing the market up big time to get to what you wanted to get back in return. That the fact that they even made a move like this to trade away a player who's probably been their most consistent defenseman all year and got a first out of it is enough to tell me they still care about the future.
Absolutely.
Now there's definitely discussion worth having as we get through the rest of the weekend's decisions and moves and things like that, where you may ask questions about how serious are they in this whole process.
Right.
Fair enough. But for this one, you didn't have to move them. They were very much on the path of Scott Laughton with this one from a few years back. Do we make the trade at the deadline, or do we wait until the last minute and then say, here's an extension?
Right.
And they went the trade route and they got a first round pick back. The Johansson thing is what it is. I don't even really have much to talk about with it. I know there's a lot of stuff floating around out there as the weekend has progressed. He obviously they basically, the real bulk of the story is Danny Briere addressed the media basically right after the trade happened and expressed that, like, he's not playing here.
Right.
Like, well, he might play in the minors, but and that's even then that's a question.
Right. And some stories came out about, potentially the room souring on Johansson in Colorado. And
it's already well documented that he didn't get along with Tortorella either when he was in Columbus. Right. So there you got that angle as well.
So there was conversation. He got waived immediately. The trade happened shortly before 2:00. He was on the waivers when 2:00 hit. The retention is interesting because Colorado was willing to pay to get rid of this asset, right? Because
no, I don't think that's what it is at all. I think you've got it a little mixed up because because he's making $8 million a year on the whole contract. The half that's retained is still being retained by Nashville. So the Flyers are paying $4 million, and the other retention is.
So there's no additional retention.
No. So
I'm sorry.
So the Flyers are still on the hook for $4 million, and they were willing to, because it happened about 48 hours before the trade deadline, they were willing to then retain half to get him off the books if possible.
Okay.
Because basically they've said in no certain terms there's no future here with this.
Right.
And on one hand, I can already see that there's going to be people out there going, then why? Right? The reason why is because this is how you get the first round pick.
This is how you get the first round pick.
It's like sitting there going, like, honestly, if you wonder, especially after watching some of the recent performances, if you're wondering, why is Cal Peterson here? He's here because you got a first round pick for him too.
Yep. Well, and here's the thing. Joe Sakic, I know he's the president of hockey ops, but he runs a good ship in Colorado. I know he's not the GM anymore, but he runs a good ship in Colorado, and this is what good ships do, right? You trade Sean Walker, or you're getting the asset, you're trading Sean Walker, trading for Sean Walker, and yes, you're willing to give up your first round pick,
but you need a sweetener.
You get the 5th round pick back. You do all these little things,
contract off your books,
and and you get this contract off your books, and you do all these little things. And and that's not to say, by the way, that I think the Flyers lost the trade, because I think you also accomplish your goals in getting a first round pick for Sean Walker.
Well, and here's the easiest way to break it down, honestly, too. Like take it this way, okay? Sean Walker goes to Colorado. For right now, as we speak of it today, this is a rental. Yeah. They may sign him later on. They may not. We don't know yet. That's for Colorado to decide.
We may get into it, but they traded Bowen Byram away, so they have to have some sort of plan for their defense.
Well, right, that's true. But like beyond,
we may get into that later.
But beyond that, so Walker at this moment is a rental. That's it. They may choose to change that, but he's at the moment a rental. If Johansson has no future in Philadelphia because that was already well established, then okay, that is what it is too. Now that's got a year left on it beyond this year on the contract. Something's going to have to give at some point, whether they do find a way to move it later or buy it out or whatever the case may be. Like you could buy it, rather than buy it out like now, because I think that is a possibility in a way. There's definitely a way to do it. You would, then you would put way more years on the books for the buyout, so you could wait until the end of the year, do it. It would be 2 years. Right. You figure it out. Like there's ways to figure it out. But that, regardless, it's not that long term of a thing, the Johansson part of it.
Correct.
The 5th that you send back is really not that consequential either, because those are lottery tickets. If one of them hits, that's wonderful. You run and try to play the lottery again, probably. It's a sweetener. That happens.
Yeah.
But it's not something that usually hits. So it's not something that should be as hard to part ways with. The 1st is the key thing, because the 1st is what you assume is going to be around for the longest with the team that has it.
That is the asset with the most long-term value in the deal.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why it's worth doing it. And I also throw in there again, like one of the things I've talked about is the circumstances at which Walker was even here to begin with. He was a throw-in. So Danny Briere, in making 2 separate trades that involve Walker, brought him in to get a first-round pick last year, and then shipped him out and flipped it to get another first later. That is tidy business from your general manager. That's what a general manager in a rebuild should be doing, is finding creative ways to get you into the first round.
Right. Similar to what Montreal did with Sean Monahan, right? You trade a first round pick, you take on his contract, and then a year later you flip him for a first round pick as well. But yeah, this is one of those deals where both teams get to achieve their goals. Walker gets a piece for the playoffs. Or I'm sorry, Colorado gets a piece for the playoffs in Walker. The Flyers get a first round pick. The other things are just kind of tertiary pieces to make the deal work.
And look, it doesn't happen if Walker's not playing as well as he did this year either. Like,
absolutely.
Like Walker was nearly out of the league, is my point. Like there's a reason why this starts with he was a throw-in.
Entirely.
He turned himself into one of, and let's be real about it. Like I know we have listed for later, like other things that happened at the deadline that don't involve the Flyers.
Right.
Not many of them involve a first round pick.
No, that's true.
Or at least one that's guaranteed to be. There was some conditional stuff, and this technically is conditional, but this is about as locked in of a condition as you're going to get. It's only top 10 protected for a team that a lot of people would tell you right now, with the way that they're playing, especially on home ice, especially since I'm pretty sure at this point, Nathan MacKinnon hasn't played a game on home ice yet where he hasn't gotten a point.
He's ridiculous.
If I'm right about that.
He's stupid.
Right. So like my point being, I don't think that all of a sudden next year they're going to be 25th in the league.
And God forbid something happens, their goaltending falls off a cliff and does a 2018 Vegas and 6 of them get hurt. Like, even if that does happen, okay, fine. You pick in the top 10, the pick slides to the next year, they bounce back to dominance, and you still end up picking in the back half.
But something that's important too is that, okay, because like you could sit there and go, oh, like try harder to get, or not try harder, but you know what I mean? Like, it would have been nice if they could have gotten a 3rd first-round pick this year,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
This year's draft is going to be, and I'm not saying it means it's a transformative player by any stretch. Like, it's probably not going to be your number 1. Right. But it's heavier on the defensive side. There's way more defensemen we're going to talk about than forwards. There's definitely a few forwards at the top, but it kind of levels off. It levels off, and it's a lot of defensemen that are going to be in the middle, right? The year after, it's a center heavy draft. So, if you're looking for a guy who maybe you could amount to, let's see if he turns into, because let's do this way. There's number 1 defensemen that get taken all over the place. Like I had this argument on social during the course of the week too, because somebody turned around this was over nothing. Like, this was over the stupidest thing too, because it wasn't about the Walker trade. It wasn't about like any of the other trades. It was literally over the same night, and we'll get to the other piece of business that they did during the course of that day that was more substantial. But they were a broker in a trade that involved Noah Hannafin going from Calgary to Vegas.
Which is
they were the broker,
deal.
Right? They were the broker, the third team involved that just took on a portion of the salary and got a little piece of the pie in return. All it was I think it was a 5th. Again, they got a 5th in that one too.
Yep.
And literally, basically replaced the other pick. Actually, not only replaced it, it was 2 years sooner. And I had somebody who right away is sitting there going like, well, if it's not a top 15 pick, then it never it's something wherever. And it's like, yeah, because nobody who was picked after 15th overall made it to the NHL and became a success story.
And no 3rd round picks have ever been traded more than once.
Well, and beyond that though, like my point is that, no pun intended by saying my point is, but there was a guy in the game on Saturday that they played whose last name is Point, who was not in the top 2 rounds.
And didn't he?
I wonder, is he not a superstar? Is he not an all-star? He's a number 1 center.
Yeah.
Is it impossible? Absolutely. It's not. So the bottom line was just, listen, again, it's accruing assets. That's what you're trying to accomplish. You sent one away to continue to help you get the first in the first place. And now you got another pick back because you just took on some money for the rest of this year alone. That's it.
Right.
It's completely, there's no consequences to those things. You get something for whatever happens for the rest of this year. That is smart to do that.
Absolutely.
So I don't get that type of stuff.
No.
Let's jump to the other move of that day, or unless you have something else you want to add.
Real quick, just before we get off it. If it wasn't a 1st round pick, do you keep Walker?
I would have still probably taken him for I would have still done it for a 2nd because it still would be substantial. Like, I still would take something
like that.
Well, it probably would have changed. Yeah, I think the package.
Whatever the deal would have been. Right.
Yeah, I think the package would have changed dramatically.
Right, but if the base of it remains the same.
Like, I think that's the give and take, though. You include a later round pick and take on a contract. They go to a 1st.
I think it's got to be a pretty hefty prospect or whatever else they're adding.
But you don't take on the contract and you don't throw in another late round pick, then you're probably going more towards a 2nd.
Sure.
For who knows? Maybe it was less, honestly.
Sure. And when I talk about Colorado being a good team in acquiring those assets, Danny Briere willing to pay those kind of fairly minimal assets to get a 1st round pick out.
Oh, because it's short term. Like even the Johansson part of this, it's not long term in terms of, the guy's under contract for another year. There's options leading up to it. And one of the options also, by the way, is just keeping him around.
Sure.
Like within reason. I don't know that there's, who knows? I don't know. Like,
but if you don't expect to be, if you expect to be back in the rebuild next year and don't expect to necessarily be challenging for a playoff spot,
there's
pretty little risk to having his money on the cap.
There's little risk to having his money on the cap. The bigger risk involves all the other things you're hearing about, which is one, the relationship with Tortorella, which whether or not he wants to try to patch that up or not, because there's been rumors of that. Yep. Like, whatever, look, if you want to try to patch it up, great. If not, because I don't think he's a useless player. Johansson's not a useless player at this point. I'm not saying he's great, but he's not useless. You could throw him in your bottom six and be fine.
Right. Absolutely.
And especially for 1 year, he's not a long-term future guy. If this is what it took to get a first round pick, you do it. But there's that angle of it. It was brought up on what was brought up on 32 Thoughts, who his agent is.
Yeah, which is a bone of contention.
Right, at least right now it is. Sure.
Yeah. So in case you're not aware, as our listeners might not know, his agent happens to be the same. I'm sorry, Cutter Gautier's family advisor, because he can't be.
Yeah, I love how you're bringing that part of it into the equation, because he's still in college,
right? Of course, but regardless, his family advisor happens to be the same guy as Ryan Johansson's agent, which is interesting.
And in some cases, be careful what you mess with, though, too, because if this guy's not an agent for just 3 players or 2 players, you know what I mean? Like, there's
ways to be diplomatic and keep it professional.
Bear in mind, but ultimately, like the one thing more than anything, and this is going to be a great place to transition because it takes us into the whole message behind everything else that's done.
Sure.
Is you have to be most careful when it comes to Johansson that if you are going to insert him into that locker room, that it is not going to do something to it.
Correct.
Because that is the thing that they seem to be most focused on, is how the room is. So when you're thinking of guys who bring your room together, it explains this. It explains how Nick Seeler gets a contract extension.
Absolutely, he does. And as we kind of shift on that and touch on locker room dynamics, I want to mention that the wife and I recently started Ted Lasso. And if you haven't watched it,
okay, now I've watched a decent chunk of the series to this point. I still have a little bit to go. But
we've already ripped through season 1. We've just started season 2. It's fantastic.
Okay, I will admit that I am at least far enough along into it that I'm into season 3. So
okay, but regardless, the locker room dynamics are very interesting, and there's Nick Seelers all over that show, and
there kind of is,
right. And Nick Seeler
has uttered a few of those Ted Lasso-isms, probably for sure. Nick Seeler's telling Cam York to be a goldfish.
Absolutely. Maybe there's a world. Excuse me. Maybe there's a world where he develops into your Matt Niskanen. And obviously, low rent, dollar store Matt Niskanen, and a 4-year extension at $2.7 million.
There was a reason
speaks to that.
There was a reason why I called Walker more of a Niskanen than Seeler. It's because Walker could score a few more goals.
I understand, of course,
but I get your point.
In terms of showing guys how to play the game the right way.
You're right. Well,
how to go out there.
There was a reason why, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that when we did our last show, I told you that Walker was going to be the guy to go and Seeler was going to be the guy to stay.
Yes.
And I said that one, or at least that I thought that that's the way it should be. And the reason why also was because we keep comparing Walker to Niskanen a little bit. But what was the thing about Niskanen that we never got to experience? What was the follow-up like? Yeah. That he retired after the first year where everything seemed great. It's like, oh, look at this steady Eddie, right? All this good fun stuff. And then he's gone.
Good ones.
But and he's gone, and you don't get the follow up to be like, well, was he going to be that good again? How do we know? We don't. We never.
Unfortunate.
As unfortunate as it was, has anybody even really heard much from him since? Like,
no,
he retired.
He's pulled the dust in Buffalo,
but he retired and stayed it. It wasn't like he did this thing where it was like, oh no, you know what? Maybe I made a mistake because he did retire in the middle of a crazy time in the world.
Of course.
You could always have regrets once it starts to go back to normal and be like, nah, you know what? Maybe I'm
going to try it again.
He was also only 33 when he did. It wasn't like he was like 38 and it's like, oh yeah, this is natural. He wasn't like, of all things, Niskanen retired and Justin Braun didn't at that time. And it could have easily been reversed and people would have understood it.
Right. Because Matt Niskanen, the other thing though, is Matt Niskanen, it's a lot of hard miles. Like,
he did. That's true. I mean,
he's 33, like Sean Couturier's 31. Like,
sure. And that 33, like that one season, he, famously the one game where he came back with a bubble basically.
Yep.
And bleeding out the nose and just warrior, that whole deal. And
Well, and doesn't
That's
that
the
sound a
hard
lot
mileage.
like
That's what you're talking about.
Well, right, and doesn't that sound like a lot like Nick Seeler to kind of rally it back around to this?
Sure, and once something happens where a guy can't play, you see the impact on the ice too. Like,
absolutely,
it's been felt, no question, and it's going to continue to be felt as they play tough teams and have to play without him.
And tell me that, assuming this team, holds the course and does manage to make the playoffs here, tell me Nick Seeler is not going to be fantastic in that locker room.
Sure. And there's an element for guys like that too, because Sealer's another one of these cases where, like, you can kind of come across multiple guys in this scenario where it's like, because we said it about Walker too, Seeler nearly out of hockey, nearly done, like career on life support. And now he's got a 4-year contract.
Yep. I was sitting here calling him terrible on the show, and I still don't necessarily think he's the highest skilled defenseman in the world.
He's not, but
there's things he needs to work on, of course. But he has earned his spot on this team. I am not upset that he is a part of this team for the next 4 years. I think the number is pretty reasonable. It is he's got a modified no trade for the first 2 years, so he's it's a pretty movable deal after that if you do want to.
And
it's a pretty safe deal, all things considered,
right,
based on where the team's at, where the cap's going, etc.
Right, and the only thing that I don't love is the 4th year. I would have kept it at 2 to 3, but I understand. But here's the thing.
Probably kept the number under $3 million.
Correct, because the catch was, I believe that some of the things that were out there was, if it was going to be 3, it was going to be 3-3-3.
Yep.
And look, I'm not trying to make it seem like $600,000 is a lot of money on the cap, right, but it makes a difference.
Absolutely, and if all it takes is giving him another year, no big deal.
Well, and by year 3 of the contract anyway, when you're looking to move that thing, maybe potentially, easy. Look at what the cap's going to be and what the percentage of it's going to be. It's not going to be even. It's barely going to be anything. So
easy peasy.
I didn't have a problem with this, and I didn't really put a tab for this part of it, but like the other element of this that goes into the culture, the locker room, all that stuff it is about somebody who we don't have anything to say because there's no contract that goes with it. There's no trade that goes with it. It's a guy who stayed.
Yep.
And so Scott Laughton stays also because there was discussion and there was talk about whether or not he might be able to go and things like that. And again, like, first of all, the thing with Laughton to me was, and this is the difference between Seeler and, because Seeler got the same treatment as Laughton did a few years back also, where it's either move him or sign him. Right. Take your pick. They signed him. Okay. Laughton doesn't have that situation. Laughton's got 2 more years after this year at $3 million cap hit. So what I don't understand is, like, there were people who are out there acting like they didn't trade Scott Laughton. They're not serious about this. It's over. The idea that they're rebuilding is over. And I'm sitting here looking at this going, there's 2 years left on the contract at $3 million though. Like, the door closing on the trade deadline of this year does not close the door on an off-season move, does not close the door on it being moved down the line. And the idea that this is over is ridiculous.
Well, right. And Scott Laughton in the playoffs. Do I need to say anything else? Like, if you are looking to trade Scott Laughton, and maybe they're not, I don't know.
Right.
He's a good enough player. He's a good enough player that you can keep him on your roster and he will help your young guys. He is not so good that he's going to single-handedly drag you to win games. He's kind of the perfect guy for a short-term rebuild here. But if you are going to keep him on your roster, he is going to be one of your leaders.
Well, because he already was anyway. Like, exactly. The whole idea, like the only guy to wear a letter last year in the entirety of the season, everybody knows how much they value him. And I thought that this is where I thought that just listen carefully to what Danny Briere is telling you about culture in the room. That to me came across by the end of this week as the most important factor of the rebuild to him. That more than anything, more than acquiring the talent in whatever way you have to do it or trying to figure out where it's coming from, or certainly more than tearing it all down in one fell swoop, it's who makes the locker room tighter. Who is great as great as this to have young guys who you want to see grow, who's great at fostering the young talent so that they have a chance to even grow because that they see somebody who knows how to do it. That to me was what was the most important thing. And part of what I don't like about, like, the idea of if you're on that side of it where you're ridiculing the front office because of the way that the deadline went, because they didn't sell enough in your mind, let's just say.
Right.
I encourage people to, and I try not to jump to immediate conclusions and try to have knee-jerk reactions. I don't want to do that.
Right.
Because let's face it, there's an element of that where I'm tired of doing it, because we basically did it for the last 3 years. Every time something happened, we were all over the general manager, all over the ownership. I kept pushing that for a long time, and I know plenty of others did too.
Right.
I'm not taking, just like the first offseason where it was like, listen, what did they get for Kevin Hayes? You know, it doesn't look great, but that's what you got to do to start the process, right? There's still a process to be had. And if they decide that Laughton's enough of a key part of this, that they don't want to do this, and Seeler's worth re-signing and all that, then fine. But let me see if there's a follow-up to that. So if they're staying, is somebody else going? If they would, like, and I wasn't going to have a knee-jerk reaction, and I was going to ridicule them if Walker was still here. Because then that to me says, yeah, you know what? You aren't serious about this idea. You're looking straight at, we're in the playoff race and I'm not touching the lineup. Right. That's what you're thinking. But they moved a guy for a first-round pick to start the whole process. They kept 2 other guys. They did a couple of things, as we'll get to in a minute, though. They did a couple things that rewarded the current roster for being in this spot to begin with. Again, nothing that is super consequential to beyond this season.
Nope.
Let me see the offseason and let me see how much you run this back. Because if you run it back a lot, then we have reasons to talk about how serious you are about this again. But if they don't, and they do things that we think could happen, you know, maybe Laughton's not off the table as the offseason goes. And you think about that package at that time and what you could get for him.
Well, maybe, especially after playoff games.
Right. Maybe we're talking about Rasmus Ristolainen. Maybe we're talking about Cam Atkinson. And I'm not talking about that it's all via trade either. If Cam Atkinson gets bought out,
the buyout candidate, right, for sure.
But if Cam Atkinson gets bought out and you're no longer going to have that guy to put into the lineup over, say, Bobby Brink.
Yep.
Then I understand where you're going with this. But if you're going to come back next year with, well, we still have Cam Atkinson and Bobby Brink is going to keep sitting out games, then I question your direction. But I'm not questioning it based off of what you did right now until I see the whole picture. And that's why, like, I come into this, like, could they have moved Seeler? Sure, they could have. Could they have moved Laughton? Sure, they could have. But not if the price wasn't worth it to them. Tell me what sounds more valuable at this point. Knowing exactly what you're going to get from Nick Seeler for the next 2-3 years. I'll take the 4th one off because by that point, who the hell knows?
Yeah.
But for the next 2 to 3 years, if you get from Nick Seeler what you know you typically get from Nick Seeler, if the best you were going to get back was a 3rd, is it better to keep him or just send him off for the 3rd? It's not a top 2, and I don't know that getting another 3rd was going to give you enough draft capital to move back into the 2nd anyway. Right. It just, I don't know if it was going to. And in Laughton's case, Briere told you everything you need to know about Laughton, which was, we know what his worth is, and we probably got offers that were fair value, but it's not about getting fair value. It's more than that. We need more than that because it's the parts that they don't see that we get to see.
Absolutely.
That's what it's going to take. Say no more, Danny Briere. You've expressed exactly what the purpose of this is then. That you're looking at the room and how the room is built and how sturdy it is based off of both veteran leadership and bringing in younger guys. And as it evolves, the goal should be bring in as much talent as possible around the pieces like that. If it's Laughton and Seeler, then it's going to be eventually somebody else is going to go and something else is going to have to come in that helps really push it to the top. Because Seeler really, in a perfect world, when you get to the end of this thing, Seeler is playing either 3rd pairing or not at all, and you're 7. And Laughton is on your 4th line.
I agree with that.
That's the perfect world once it comes together. And if that's what you want to keep around, then that's fine. But you're going to have to eventually get it to where you elevate people. And I also don't love the part from the draft pick perspective. Like, again, the idea that everything better be top 15, because if it's not, then good luck getting high-end talent.
No, forget about it. That's not how that works.
Then I know,
develop.
But then I'm sorry. Then how have the Boston Bruins been successful for however long it has
25 years
without ever having to really pick up there unless they made some big time move that was like through a trade?
Unless they're trading away Tyler Seguin, right?
Right. Well, they drafted Seguin that high is my point.
Well, but right, that's fair.
They made a trade to get there, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, and they traded him away.
Well, and then they did. That's true.
Right.
But you know what I'm saying. Like
Well,
I'm sorry. No, at the end of the day, the Boston Bruins' number 1 forward was taken 25th overall, and their number 1 defenseman was taken in the teens.
Yep. Make it
It
work.
doesn't have to be number 1 or number 2 or number 5 or whatever it is.
Sure.
It doesn't always have to be that way. And if you're a good enough GM in the league, you're going to know what to find, and your scouts are going to know what to find to make it so that you find the diamond in the rough more than other teams do, because it sure seems to happen. Like think about Pittsburgh's big run too. Pittsburgh got a ton of great players that were they got a ton of great
number
players.
1 overall picks anchoring things down pretty good over there.
Sure, anchoring it, but that's okay. That's set the
number 1 and number 2.
Okay, and I get your point with okay, but like where I'm also going with it is that by the time they won like that, sure, the first
wasn't
cup,
Letang like 4?
I don't think Letang was that high, was he?
But he was.
No, I don't think. Yeah, I don't think Letang was that high, and Gensel certainly wasn't. That's more. That's fair. That's more the team I'm getting to. Actually, is like
I'm sorry. Yeah. Letang was 62nd overall. So
so there you go. Yeah. But that was your number 1 defenseman for how many years?
No, that's fair.
Like. Eventually, your number 1 goal, like the number 1 goalie that was taken first overall, wasn't your number 1 goalie. Right. Like you eventually rounded this thing out where it was, sure, the 2 guys that were taken 1, 2, they're the biggest parts of this, but everybody else was like wild card.
Right.
You know, Brian Rust. Brian Rust is like not one of those types of players. He was not top 10.
No.
You know,
and here's the other thing is. Yes, you made some moves. You got a first round pick. You might not have gotten a premium first round pick, but you got a first round pick. As a rebuilding team, you did well. You got a first round pick in that deal. Touching briefly on the Hannafin deal, you retained just under $2.5 million. You get a 5th round pick from Vegas this year for that.
Mm-hmm.
Then Danny Briere looked at his roster and said, okay, we've made 2 moves to sell assets off to make the team marginally worse this year, right? Like, take up a little bit of cap space, trade away Sean Walker, things like that.
Yeah.
And then he looked and said, okay, now what can I do to reward this roster?
Sure.
Because Danny Briere could have said, let's tear it all down. Like you said, you could have traded Scott Laughton. You could have traded, whoever, name your player here, Cam Atkinson, if whatever.
Well, and again, part of that equation comes from what the standings say a little bit. Like you
exactly. And if you were 15 points clear of a playoff spot, maybe you could sell all those things and still make it.
Right.
Whatever.
Like this is like, well, no, but this is a no brainer if they're where everybody thought they were. It's just like it's just like the goaltending thing. Nobody cares how Cal Peterson's playing if you're not in a playoff race.
It's just like the trade deadline last year. Like the only reason we were so upset about James Van Riemsdyk like not getting traded is the fact that you're 30 points out of the playoffs.
Which was a shame too, to be honest, because it has nothing to do with Van Riemsdyk himself.
We love Van Riemsdyk.
But generally speaking, it was like it's not you. You didn't choose to stick around like that. You knew it was a possibility.
I love seeing him successful.
That was the least surprising thing that was going to happen. By the way, as soon as he signed there, I knew it was going to be a good deal for them.
Oh yeah, and yep.
It was so easy to tell. Like,
yep.
He doesn't have as many goals as I thought he might. To be honest, like I had sat there and thought 20 was very much on the table for JVR in Boston.
That the power play lost a little bit of jump with Bergeron losing Bergeron.
It did, sure, but still, I knew that wasn't going to be an issue, No,
and it hasn't been. But no, back to Danny Briere's kind of deadline mentality here is he made a couple of moves to change it up or to move some pieces out, and then he called the Buffalo Sabres and said, "All right, let's reward this team. Let's replace Sean Walker." As best you can. You throw a body at the lineup. I don't know if Erik Johnson will play every night. I don't know if he'll play in the top 4.
Well,
I don't know
right
if
now
he'll play Sean Walker's right. I don't know if he'll play Sean Walker's minutes, down the stretch. But as
right now, he might.
But as of right now, again, Danny Briere is saying, okay, listen, I'm not completely hanging you guys out to dry. I know we got a couple of guys hurt. Let's get a body in here to help. I know he's not as good as Sean Walker is, but that's okay. We got a body in the door. And then the other move, because they kind of were announced within minutes of each other, and they feel like very similar moves. It was a little more of a shake it up deal with the Nashville Predators, and you get Denis Gurianov, and in return is Wade Allison. So you're down a ginger, but you add Denis Gurianov, who had
the important things to you, right?
Absolutely. So you add Denis Gurianov, who had an excellent season for Dallas leading into the bubble, and then in the bubble, helped them reach the cup final, scored a couple of really clutch goals in the playoffs for them.
Sure.
And then has kind of tapered off since then and hasn't really done a whole lot, and has...
Yeah, you're already hitting the nail on the head with that deal. It's a change of scenery for both guys.
Absolutely.
Straight up. Wade Allison wasn't going to play here anymore probably because it just didn't. Again, it's one of these things where it just doesn't jive with John Tortorella in this case. Like something wasn't clicking there, and you get a guy who you get at least a look at. I compared it to it's like getting a guy from the minors that you call up for the last quarter of the season and see do we have something here or do we not?
Yeah, and in Gurianov, you do get a guy with a little bit of playoff experience, a little,
The thing that intrigues me the most about him is he scored 20 goals in that one season. Like it's not like he didn't have any talent at all. It was the guy was drafted 12th overall too.
He was a really, really strong flash in the pan. Like it was a good season. It wasn't just a hot stretch in the playoffs. Like he parlayed it into I think he was a deal making $3.9 million or something like that for a couple of years. Like,
and then it really fell off, especially the years like it was because he was in Montreal, then he was in Nashville, and it's just he's really bounced around a little bit. Like all of a sudden, what started as he looks like he's going to be a piece for Dallas for a while turned into he's now he's on his fourth team.
Yep. But he's still a guy, like I said, once you get there, 17 points in 32 playoff games, most of which in Dallas during that bubble run.
Yeah.
And
I mean, we'll see. We'll see.
Maybe he gets into your bottom six. Maybe he slips onto your second, he shores up your second power play unit a little bit. He's a guy who can shoot the puck. You never know. He's
I like
26 years old.
I like Danny Briere's word for it. He's interesting.
Absolutely.
It's
a good opportunity at a second chance.
6'3", big winger, can skate well. Like you got elements there where it's like it's intriguing. So you got to see if it just all equates to working for what you're trying to go for. That's about it.
Right.
The Johnson one was totally different because the Johnson one, it was bringing an extra body because
it's a pure ad.
Well, because your defense is battered big time at the moment. But there's something to be said about adding a guy like that because of what he was. Well, for two reasons. One, and this kind of takes it back to the Scott Laughton stuff for a second, but Briere talked about having a bond with a guy you played with before. And Briere happened to also have played with Erik Johnson at the tail end of his career.
In Colorado, right?
Right. So what he directly knows what Erik Johnson is. And that was granted that was much more during Johnson's prime. I get it.
A little bit.
He's past it at this point, but you adjust to that. To me, and like the irony is like
another guy, by the way, picked first overall. Since we're talking about high level picks, the irony, Louis Blues, crazy to think about. Crazy.
Because he didn't play there that long. He only was there for 4 years, and then it was off to Colorado for the big chunk of his career,
which is where he made his name.
Alternate captain, won a Stanley Cup in 2022. Like. This is the thing. We were doing shows during that playoff run for them, by the way, pretty much like bringing him up in conversation because we always because we always kept looking for the if they win, who's getting it next.
Yep. And he was high on that list.
I think he was the next guy to get it, wasn't he?
He was pretty early on that list for sure.
He was either second or third after Landeskog.
Yeah, right.
So there you go.
I think McKinnon got it first.
He might have, but it was pretty close after. Like they got him out there pretty quick. It was because he was part of it, and I think Andrew Cogliano was too because he had been around for a while. Things like that. Yeah. All right. Anyway, I digress. But like the idea, the irony of saying this is that of what I'm about to say is that when we do finally get to his first game with the Flyers, all you want him to be is a guy who helps prevent the other team from scoring.
Oh.
I know that then that first game, that was easier said than done. He actually didn't have that bad of a numbers night, all things considered. Now, granted, some of these don't factor in. Like, you can't look at plus minus when 3 power play goals are scored against you on top of it. That's hard to, we can't really go there. But
yeah, we'll talk about that one in a minute.
But regardless, that's beside the point.
Yeah.
I think that's the goal, though. You just want him to be a guy who can help prevent the other team from scoring. You're definitely not looking at him to be the guy who is now the puck mover, or basically be like Walker was and jump up on the play a lot. I mean, although he does have 3 goals this season, which is interesting. Like, he's got 3 goals, no assists. That's an interesting
unusual stat line for a defense.
Right. You don't normally see that, but yeah. So I get it. I get why they did it, and I don't know if either of these guys is even going to be in the lineup when it really gets down to it, if they don't need to be. But kind of for right now, they need to be, so to speak. Like, there's an element where, yes, these guys need to be in the lineup because of other circumstances, to an extent.
And in the meantime, you get a chance to look at them.
Yeah, maybe not so much Gurianov. I think Gurianov could go back and forth. Like, I don't think, to be honest, I don't think Gurianov was part of the plan for Saturday.
I agree.
I think it turned into that later, and we'll get into that, but I don't think it was part of the plan. So we'll see where that goes. But that is basically the bulk of the trade deadline from the Flyers side. There's nothing else to really talk about here. Like, on top of that, did you want to jump into the results now, or did we want to hit on a couple of the other trades before we
I think we'll save the rest of the trades around the league for the end of the show.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's do the results part.
The Flyers did manage to play some hockey this week. I know the trades were kind of the big story, as is usually the case around trade deadline time.
Yeah, I love the part. I do love the fact that basically for so many people, and talking about this from a weekly standpoint, Monday is just glossed over.
Yeah,
the game against the Blues was like, that's a game that happened.
That is a game that happened. That was 2 teams skating around, and the Flyers had 42 shots, but
a 2-1. Well, yeah, 2-1 shootout loss. And look, in hindsight, that ending is a bigger deal than it seems to be.
You would have really liked to get that second point.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, well, look, they were close. Let's make that clear.
Yeah.
Like, Cam York hit a post in overtime.
Yep. Binnington played really well.
Binnington did play really well. You got to give credit where credit's due on that. So
he played really well.
It was very much, granted, with a point for overtime in the shootout, but very much like that Ranger game against Shesterkin, where it's like, listen, you can throw everything you got at him. It's not going in today.
Hey, by the way, speaking of getting points in overtime, you saw Minnesota the other night, right?
I did. I thought that was gutsy as anything. I couldn't believe that somebody actually would do that.
You heard Matthew Boldy come out and say that he didn't know that if they had lost, that they wouldn't have gotten the point.
You know what's interesting to me about that? And granted, none of their recent games have warranted this,
right?
That's totally, like, I would not have pegged John Hines to be the guy to do that first, or attempt to do that first.
The Bill Guerin team, though.
Well, that part, I guess, is a little fair. But, like, to me, I'm sorry, the first coach that comes to mind, if you're going to do something gutsy like that, I would think it was Patrick Waugh written all over it.
Have the Islanders gotten to overtime at all recently? I feel like they've just been winning their games in regulation.
In Patrick Waugh's tenure, they did early on anyway. Like, they've had a couple situations where it's like they were playing Pittsburgh. Would you have attempted that against Pittsburgh?
Yeah. But
generally speaking,
as we're coming down the stretch, they currently sit in the second wild card spot. But
I know we'll get into it as we get to the ahead part, because
regardless,
it's important.
Right. Regardless, Flyers, like you said, Monday night kind of gets glossed over. Because I think it's in large part because everyone was looking at that Florida game as the start of this 10-game stretch. And, we'll get into looking ahead, and San Jose is kind of the last easy game for a little while here. But in the meantime,
it's because I've been on this for about 3 weeks at this point about this 10-gamer, this 10-gamer, this 10-gamer.
And it finally is really coming. Yep.
Right.
And it starts Thursday in Florida, hostile territory. Sergei Bobrovsky playing out of his absolute brain and skull.
I believe the Panthers had won 6 straight coming into that game too. Yep. So, like, and not to mention the fact that also, by the way, your defensive lineup that night was down. You by that point you had traded Walker, you had extended Seeler, but he's hurt, he can't play. So okay, now you're down 2 defensemen from the very previous game you played, let alone no Ristolainen, no Drysdale. So you're down 4. Now you got to call up 2 different people who have not played. Right, Ronnie Attard and Adam Ginning, who have not played yet at the NHL level this season. So you're like, okay, 2 season debuts coming right up against the best.
Both played more than 17 and a half minutes.
I was gonna say, I thought you were gonna say both played more than Mark Stahl,
they did both play more than Mark Stahl,
by the way, which is also substantial. But the bottom,
they look solid,
right? The bottom line being, this game was written off before it had started, and that is why it is your best win of the season, because it was written off before it started. As you are grinding away at this thing, 1-1 most of the second period, all of the third period. And can
I say it?
Go ahead.
Playoff style win.
Oh, it absolutely is. That's the type of win that playoff teams are made of. That's the beauty of it. And especially when it comes down to it, the game-winning goal is Noah Cates makes a pass to Mark Stahl, who puts it on goal, and Garnet Hathaway gets a piece of it and then gets the rebound for the goal.
Dirtiest, grimiest goal.
But from 3 guys who have not put up the heavy points. And all 3 of them get kind of rewarded for, like, you were part of this. You had a good shift that got to that goal, and it's in the last 30 seconds of the game.
Hathaway played a great third period in that game.
He played a great game period. I thought that line was the best.
Menace.
That line was their best in the whole game. So absolutely.
Yep. Garnet Hathaway was the menace in Miami, and I know they don't play in Miami, but it's too damn catchy.
Sure. So the dynamic of this, though, is that you have the best, your best win of the season, bar none. Florida's the best team in the league. You've got all these rookies playing. Let's not gloss over the fact that also the goalie's technically a rookie too.
Yep.
So he only made a couple of huge stops on, between which one do you want to go with? The save on Barkov on the power play, stopping Reinhart on a breakaway in the first period, the couple of chances that, by the way, who did Florida add at the deadline? Vladimir Tarasenko. He gets a couple scoring chances in his first game. Yep. Like, Ersson played brilliantly. Yep. and is equally as important to that win as every other player that we just talked about on a depth line,
absolutely,
for sure. So it's your best win of the season, and you start this 10 gamer with an immediate confidence booster, an immediate make believers out of people kind of win.
Yep.
And then you follow it up with your worst loss of the season,
7-0 to Tampa Bay.
Now I don't equate this to a terrible start to this stretch as a whole. My thinking is you've got, I've included the San Jose game in this all along because there's no sense in pulling it out and then being like, oh, by the way, there's 9 other, let's just look at these 9.
Right.
It's part of a 10-game stretch.
Yeah. I might as well leave it in there.
I believe that they need 10 points out of the 10 games to stay afloat.
Okay.
And you couldn't have started it off any better with 2 massive ones. You're down to 30 seconds in the game, or even let's go even 30 seconds further and go a minute, because with 30 seconds left, they were actually starting the play that kind of works toward the game-winning goal. So you're seeing the pressure, but with a minute left, as it's kind of still settling and plays hovering in the neutral zone, you're going, just don't give anything up, because even getting the point here is big.
Enormous.
Even if you don't win it in overtime, even if it goes to a shootout and you lose, getting the point here is going to be big. And instead they turned it into 2 in regulation. Not that the regulation factor of it matters when, from Florida's standpoint, like it wasn't in division.
It can be a tiebreaker.
Right, but sure, there's elements of it where it can be. I'm saying,
especially because the Islanders are terrible and they only have like 27 wins, so like it'll be fine.
We'll get there. But that was the place to start it. And then you're looking at that game against Tampa that came up afterwards, and it's like, listen, if you could have gotten even just 1 out of that, the possibility of that staring you in the face of you could be at 5, and hey, who knows, if you win the game in Tampa, it could be 6 in the first 3 games, and you've got 7 games left to try to basically pull out 4 more points just to get to a mark that you feel comfortable with.
Absolutely.
On top of the fact that whatever, like, I don't hate the fact that you still are going to have the potential, like, let's just be clear about this part from the jump, because it's about all I need to say about this next game. You better beat San Jose.
Yeah, you better beat San Jose. And so
I don't even feel like I need to talk about it in looking ahead. The answer is you better beat San Jose. Simple.
Correct.
So,
Correct. Yep.
All right, let's say they do, because they should take care of business there. And then not to mention the fact that, like, let's play the reverse card here, if you will. going into the Tampa game, Tampa had just lost to Calgary 6-3 on the same night that the Flyers beat Florida. And John Cooper comes out and says that embarrassing. That's the word for it. Embarrassing. So you knew what they were going to come out with.
Oh, yeah.
The coach just called them out for an embarrassing game. They're coming out guns a-blazing, and they sure did. But now, look, the Flyers just got humbled too. And you're going against a team like San Jose that made more trades than anybody on deadline day, by the way, specifically deadline day.
Yep.
5 of them.
Whew.
So
they're not exactly adding.
Right. So you better win that one. And at the very least, what you can start with is, okay, 4 out of the first 3 games. Can you get 6 in the last 7?
Kevin, let's get into the real reason why they had better win Tuesday night's game.
Why is that?
You know why.
Okay, let me see why.
Tampa Bay game starts.
Okay.
Less than 2 minutes in, Victor Hedman, goal. Less than 6 minutes in, Nick Paul on the power play, goal.
Oh, you're going to jump to this stuff right away,
just over 9 minutes into the first period. Connor Sherry, goal.
Mm-hmm.
You're down 3-0 right away.
Yep.
And shenaniganery ensues. Like we don't,
Oh, I'll go into all that in a minute. So
we'll get into all that.
Yes. I'm letting you go, but then we'll get into it because we're already on this road.
Some shenaniganery ensues. Garnet Hathaway's up to Garnet Hathaway things. He gets a misconduct. No, okay.
And we'll talk about it.
We'll talk about all of this. Another goal is scored. All hell breaks loose.
Sure.
Is kind of the easiest way to say that.
Yep.
I think we dive into this because this is the reason.
All right, let me pump the brakes.
This is your motivation. Okay.
Let me just pump the brakes on it for 1 second. And
okay.
we'll get there because I want to kind of take. Yeah, they should get the 2 points against San Jose, and then I think you've got again 7 games coming up against all playoff teams. I think you need at least 6 points. Get it to 10-10, and we'll see what happens. Right.
And by the way, you don't just beat San Jose; you put up 8 against San Jose.
The first score, and I'm not saying this is exactly what it's going to be. I'm not saying they have to win it like this, but the score that popped into my head, especially after watching the Islanders beat them 6-1, I think was the score, or something like. No, it was probably worse than that.
Yep.
I think it was worse than that. 6-1 was the one against the Ducks, I think.
Oh, okay.
So I'm actually pulling up the Islander schedule really quick to get it.
Yeah.
No, 7-2, and I literally looked at that score and I put that into my head because I'm like, that's what you need to do.
Correct.
That team is terrible. You need to deliver a game like you should come.
Fill them in.
Right, and I wouldn't stop. Like, keep going.
Correct.
Don't you need to turn that one and John Tortorella.
He's going for 50.
John Tortorella hates this, and I'm not trying to he doesn't like using this word, but I feel like you need to make a statement with that one.
Correct. Yes.
Not in the sense that it's doing anything for hey, you beat this monument. Like you want to talk about making a statement. Beating Florida in Florida while they're on a 6-game heater is a statement. But
and we'll get into the motivations why as we get into it.
Sure.
John Tortorella is not stupid.
No, I hear you, but we'll get to it. So, but the bottom line is that regardless of we'll have to see if that's enough. That the idea of if you're at 4 points through these first 3, if 6 over the last 7 turns out to be enough, maybe it needs to be 8. Who knows? It's going to be tough. We know this. And there's pressure now because the Islanders are knocking down the door. And then you start watching, and then you're going to start watching the Lightning and the Red Wings, and maybe even the Capitals still for a little bit because they're still lingering at the moment. I think eventually that they will drop out of this. They did sell, and they're currently on the start of a West Coast trip that at this time of the year, I just don't see them staying afloat through it. But Tampa,
Red Detroit's schedule down the stretch is pretty soft.
But this is my point. So Tampa and Detroit will always be hovering around right now. They already were. The difference was that with a cushion on the 3rd spot, you weren't really giving those teams a thought. Now you are.
Correct.
You have to. The Islanders are hot, and you can't take that away from them. But as much as you can look at the offensive outbursts they've had lately and say it's only San Jose, it's only Anaheim, and those teams are bottom feeders, the Islanders dominated Boston when they played them. And they won against Dallas, and they've done some impressive things in their own right.
And even just the Islanders scoring goals is indicative of change. And
they've got a tougher schedule coming eventually coming up soon. They're going to go into a stretch where they play. Now, Ottawa's not as much of a task. I get it, but they start with Ottawa. It's a back-to-back, so they play Ottawa, then the Rangers. There's a tough one with the Rangers. Carolina will be tough. Detroit is going to be tough because Detroit should get up for a game like that, knowing there's implications. Yeah. Winnipeg is tough. They have to play the Devils the next night, but it's a back-to-back. You never know how that's going to go. They get a little bit of a pause. They get 3 days off. They play Florida, then Tampa on the road. That's no picnic either.
Right, and then did that.
And then that takes you into April, where the very first day of April, you get a Flyers Islanders head-to-head.
It's a big game.
And
on that same day, by the way, Detroit plays Tampa in another enormous game.
Wow, I didn't even realize that was a part of the schedule.
But also, without
but you've got to acknowledge now you've got company. Simple as that. And I don't know if you realize. I'll actually ask because I like doing this to you.
Real quick before you do that, by the way, Detroit's schedule ends. You better make sure that you're not competing with Detroit at the end because they end with a home and home with the Montreal Canadiens.
Their
final 2 games.
And I know why you're saying what you're saying. That one's interesting though because Montreal's played a lot of teams tough lately.
Yeah, but not if Detroit's fighting for the playoffs.
No, Detroit better be motivated. Is all I'm saying.
Yeah,
Montreal may love that idea that they get to
back-to-back home and home.
Right.
Detroit and then Montreal.
But Montreal may love the fact that they have the chance to keep them out of the playoffs.
That's true.
That's
true. They'll be getting up for that one.
I look at this is the reason why I say what I say about San Jose. San Jose doesn't look like they're interested in playing spoiler anymore. They were a little bit for a little while, and now they've sold off, and it's like now they're even more depleted.
It's a pretty disinterested group of hockey players.
And Anaheim's the same way. Like I looked at, I knew coming up on that because they were playing Anaheim post deadline at that point. That wasn't going to be what it used to be. Anaheim was kind of like remember how Anaheim beat the Devils about a week ago or so, and it's like, yeah, that was before you traded Adam Enrique and did all that stuff, right?
The soul is going to kind of slip out of that room over these last.
But I don't get that sense. Like the Islanders play Thursday night against Buffalo. I don't think that's a cakewalk, just because Buffalo's not making the playoffs this year.
Oh no, absolutely not. They have Bowen Byram. They got rejuvenated.
Sure.
Casey Middlestaff, Bowen Byram,
and that's all I'm saying is that's not a cakewalk. That's all I'm saying. And then certainly when you play Rangers, Hurricanes, Red Wings, Jets all in the same week, that might be, now granted, the Flyers are playing a tough schedule that week too. That's really all part of this. Yeah. That's all part of this. But that's, that could be, who knows? That could be a 4-game losing streak for the Islanders, and if you win 2 games, you get something out of it. That's the way you got to look at it. You've got to take care of your own business, and they've got to take care of theirs. And we'll see who kind of weathers the storm with that.
Right. And you put yourself in a spot where they have to win all of their games in hand. So you've done the best you can with what you got, but you still have to win as many games as you can from here on out.
Well, and the situation, the part of the situation now is that they don't have they've got more games in hand than the points gap is, so they can control their now they can control their own destiny, not the other way around. That's the only downside. So this is why I'm bringing it up, because quite literally, now I don't, because of point total, this won't change. But for a change, we're recording on a Monday night, not a Sunday. For a change, a little different. The Islanders are playing the Los Angeles Kings on the back end of a back-to-back. Now, if the Islanders just lose the game, nothing happens.
We're big Kings fans tonight.
Sure, I bet. But nothing changes. But if the Islanders win the game, they are now tied with the Flyers in points, and they will assume the 3rd spot in the Metro.
Yep.
The Flyers don't drop out of the playoff race as a result.
As of right
because
now,
because Detroit doesn't play. So Detroit's still going to be 2 points behind.
Right. Detroit has stumbled a little bit.
Detroit has a game in hand on there too, so it brings the same thing into principle that I think that
things are pretty tenuous.
Yes. But here's my question, because this is what I was going to
go for
to the game. What day was it when the Flyers last were in a playoff spot?
We're not in a playoff spot.
Yeah, like the last time the Flyers woke up in the morning and did not hold a playoff spot.
December 9th.
You are dangerously close. It's actually a little longer than that. It was December 4th.
Oh, I feel
the
great
morning.
About
the morning of December 4th was the last time the Flyers woke up and were not in a playoff spot. And do you know what happened on December 4th? Because they played to get back into a playoff spot. I'll tell you that much.
Beat the New York Rangers.
No, because they haven't beat the Rangers this year.
Oh, okay, hit me.
That was the night that they won the second of a home and home against Pittsburgh with Sean Couturier scoring in overtime.
Okay.
And that since then, but so my point in bringing this up is they've been there the entire time. But as we alluded to, they also have managed to avoid the injury bug very well this season. And now they are down 3. They are down 3 regular defensemen, traded another, had the goalie that started the season as the number 1 get charged with sexual assault, leaving a rookie goaltender to take over as the number 1.
And Cal Peterson and Felix Sandstrom splitting backup duties.
You can add that layer if you would like. I'm just sticking with the rookie being number 1 right now. If they finish this, it will be immensely impressive. And for a while, it sure looked like they definitively would because there wasn't really much of a threat from anybody else. But now there is. And this is where the playoff teams emerge because they can handle it. So we will see if the Flyers can handle it.
Absolutely.
And that is where I am going to leave the part of the best win and the worst loss part and just get into everything that went into Saturday.
All right, let's go.
Because I know you're chomping at the bit for this.
John Tortorella. You may know him. He is the Philadelphia Flyers head coach. He thinks this team has balls. He had some funny yearbook stuff. We love John Tortorella.
Amend that last statement, by the way. He does think the team does, but he also made sure to specify that Nick Seeler does.
Okay, Nick Seeler definitely does.
That was said a few days ago.
Okay. So remember that shenaniganery I mentioned earlier with Garnet Hathaway? Okay. Shortly after that, that shenaniganery was a really poor tripping call that led to John Tortorella essentially giving it to the junior official on the ice, as far as referees go.
I mean, do you want me to just dive in with the rundown because I have
the reins? Absolutely.
Because I have a lot of what you have on there. So let's start with this, okay? Because you already mentioned, I think you already mentioned the score of the game, what it turned out to be.
Yep.
In just breaking this game down, there's nothing to break down within it.
No,
because
they put up a touchdown on you.
No, but once the first 10:49 is over, the rest of the game was already a wash to begin with.
Correct.
This is kind of the sad part from what we were talking about earlier. I got nothing for you on Denis Gurianov or Erik Johnson. I'm not saying they did nothing. I'm just saying it's a tough evaluation process when you know the other team does not have to give it their all for the rest of the game and push it like they normally do, and the game is already a lost cause, and you're just out there trying not to. Yeah. You're trying not to have anybody else get hurt.
Yep, you're kind of playing a preseason
and that almost didn't happen.
Yeah,
for what it's worth.
You're playing a preseason game at that point.
Let's start with this part before we even get to Tortorella, because this is where kind of the whole thing starts to unravel to begin with. To start with, I don't know how you end up playing a game with 5 defensemen. I get why Adam Ginning was sent down.
Sure.
I just would have never even let him leave Florida.
Right.
I would have waited until the road trip was over and you can go back home. It shouldn't have happened. And I understand, like, the story is they tried to get him back there. They weren't going to be able to. They weren't able to successfully get it. Like, the idea is that they maybe had it, like they had a plane ticket for him. They were going to get him on a plane. It never worked out that way. He could not come back in time to be an emergency recall.
Right.
My answer is just, why tempt fate?
Of course.
Like, he's already there. He had just played in Florida the night before. As much as you can assume you're waking up on Saturday with 6 healthy defensemen because you just acquired one, never take it for granted. Hopefully there's a lesson learned there that you keep an extra body around so you don't have to play like that. I just would have never even, like, I understood the paper move. I understood that it has to do with, him being eligible for the AHL playoffs if you want him to play there, all that stuff. I just would have never sent him back truly. But we can get to that. Let's actually start from before where you were going to start. Okay, you started with the Hedman goal 1-0. Okay, let's go right after that. The first penalty to Ronnie Attard that kind of sets this thing in motion. There's no penalty on Attard on that play.
No, none.
If you want to make a holding call there, maybe there was one on Mark Stahl in that spot. Like, he semi grabs a guy, but I don't see it. Adder doesn't do anything to get a call there. So where they got a Ronnie Adder call from, I don't know. Like I said, maybe there's a hold on Stahl in that case. Oh, by the way, here's another layer to this. They played the puck and cleared it, and the whistle didn't blow. So the officials already didn't know what they were doing with that situation. Like, whatever. Okay. So they, there's a call. They send Adder to the box. They score on the power play. So now the blood is already boiling at 2-0. It's, you're down 2-0. The eyes are on the officials a little bit more now. You're not having a great start. You blink, and now it's going to be 3-0. It's 3-0 on a shot that by that point, like, look, Erisson's got to stop that one because he doesn't, exactly what kind of night he's having. He's having a rough night at the office too. And then you see Adder take another penalty. And again, what's the call here? Because I don't think there's a penalty on anybody on that. It's two players whose skates get tangled. One guy goes down. It should have been a no call. But instead, the officials not only made a call, but they announced the wrong team. They announced a penalty on Tampa, and then we're like, wait a minute, no, it wasn't. It's on Adder again. Let's put him back in the box. So now so now Torts is really boiling, right? Because they changed the call, and it's all that, right? About a minute later, Garnet Hathaway gets a 10-minute misconduct for a shove after a whistle. Something that happens about 100 times during a regular hockey game, and we're dishing out 10s. Well, that's honestly, like, if that's 10 minutes, make it a no contact league.
Okay, here's the
seriously,
thing.
I thought that was disgraceful to say that's 10 minutes. That shows how little control you had over the game right then and there.
See, and I'm trying really hard to give the referees the benefit of the doubt where I can. And there's a lot of spots in this situation where I cannot. But in this situation, I can give them the benefit of the doubt on this one because I think they saw a volatile situation. Couple quick goals, a loose call or two. And when something like that happens, you just give a 10. And he didn't kick him out of the game. He didn't put the Flyers down a man. And I think in that particular situation, that far away from a whistle on either side of things, right? While players are changing, I'm okay with that particular call while you're attempting to keep a game under control in a game that has potential to get out of control, especially with the guy being involved being one of the guys who can very easily escalate it out of control.
And I get all of that. I think it's soft. I think it's brutally soft to say that was worth 10 minutes.
And especially
at the timing too. Like you're 9.5 minutes into the game at that point, because about another minute goes by before, the next goal is scored and we get to the real meat of this conversation. But like 10 minutes into the game, if that's what you're calling 10s on, then why, like, honestly, call the game off. Like it's ridiculous. Like it tells me, like, here's the other part.
Hit a guy that you can't shove a guy like that far away from a whistle. All it's gonna do.
I didn't think it was that far after. I didn't think it was that far after a whistle. To be honest, like
they were mid-line change. There were like 14 players on the ice.
I still don't like. My problem with it is that stuff like this happens on a regular basis, though, and. Like, again, it's 10 minutes in, and I get it. You're saying you're trying to keep the temperature down on the game as much as possible. It's only up because of you to begin with. Like, I'll even give them the benefit of the doubt on the first call. Like I said, if you're calling Adder for a penalty that's not a penalty, and you thought, okay, like, look, you saw something, there was a scramble at the net, they didn't score on it. Stahl looks like he maybe grabbed somebody instead.
Right.
Like, all right, maybe you just called the wrong number. Like, I don't know how you're getting Mark Stahl confused with anybody, because he's a pretty unique looking guy. And wears a completely different number. It's not like it was 18 and 14 out there. And it's like, oh, I got to get one of these teen guys grabbed a player. I'm calling up a holding penalty, right? Like, regardless, sometimes that happens. A guy makes a call, gets the wrong guy. All right. I'm not faulting you for that. I thought the other one was just a non-call in general. It shouldn't have been a call on Tampa. It shouldn't have been a call on the Flyers. It should have been just a no call. It happens. And now because you're really in a hole, because you've already got their blood boiling from the first call that they didn't like. Now you've made a second call they don't like, and now you're issuing. And oh, by the way, like the other part of the equation where you're right about this is that what we also didn't mention is that literally the immediate face off after the second goal, Nick Delorier gets in a fight to try to spark something. So now you've got that going too, where it's like, you know, that they're trying to turn this thing back around. I just don't understand how, you know, like the part that I don't get is that Garnet Hathaway's done a lot of things over his career that could warrant a lot of penalty minutes. Don't take something that I like.
This was pretty minor.
Right. After the whistle, like, I get it. After the whistle, they're in between a line change. I get it. He shoved a guy. He didn't go out and like cold cock a guy and like knock him out.
And it's situational, and you know that. And it's a powder keg, and you know that. And John Tortorella is already angry and yelling, and you know that.
I'm also saying that what they did in that spot, as much as they're trying to keep the peace, also escalates the situation because you're not making anybody's blood boil any less.
Well, and let's get into that, right? So,
So, okay, fine. So, by the way, so now, like, through all of this, Delorier's off the ice because of the fight. Hathaway's gone for basically the rest of the period. It was like, I think it was 10:02 remaining when that misconduct was given. So he's basically done for the period.
Right. He is.
Or something like that. And Adder's in the box too. So you're down 3 players right off the bat because one guy fights, one guy gets a 10, and one guy got called for a penalty that probably should have been a no call.
Yep.
And
by the way, you're down 3-0, 4-0.
You're down 3-0, and they're on a power play, and they score on that one too. Okay. So again, once they score, this is when the powder keg does erupt because in the midst of Eriksson doesn't got it tonight, right?
Correct.
He doesn't have it. Not that I think that like the goal that Braden Point scores to make it 4-0 is his fault. I don't even think the one that Hedman scored was his fault. You know, he seemed like he was beating himself up a little bit over the rebound for Nick Paul. He's got to stop the Sherry goal. Like, I get it. You know, not a good night though. So you get him out of there because he's already given him. I mean, let's face something else too. And I want to go back and double check just to make sure I get this number right. But for the game, Tampa Bay, I believe, finished with 26 shots for the game. Tampa was up in shots after the fourth goal, 15-2.
Yeah, and then score effects take over, and you know,
of course they do. But what I'm getting at is that not only was it like, oh, hey, by the way, it's like 4-0 and whatever. Like it's not like it was 4-0. No, right. I'm saying it's not like it's 4-0 where the goalie doesn't have it. He gave up 4 goals on 7 shots. We got to get this guy out of here. It's 4 on 15, and it's 10:49 into the game.
And also, by the way, it's Tampa Bay.
Right. He's getting peppered. So
Tampa Bay, the first game after the trade deadline. Like, this is when their season begins. Hello?
Right. So, all right. So anyway, they're in the middle of making a goalie change, and Tortorella is ripping into Brandon Schrader, who is he's relatively new at the NHL level. He made his debut at the NHL level in 2019. He's got, according to Scouting the Refs, he's got 174 career NHL games and no playoff experience. So Torts is getting on him, and the other official for the night is Wes McCauley, who obviously everyone knows for the viral moments and such. And listen, he's a well-respected official in the game. And everybody can have their opinion about Wes McCauley because of the showmanship and kind of putting himself in the attention, putting himself in the spotlight a little bit with the calls and things like that. When you see these polls, they do player polls, like the Athletic does player polls, the NHLPA does player polls, right? Like stuff like that. He's always the top. He's always the top official. Like, I think players and coaches tend to like Wes McCauley in the sense that you always know where you stand with him typically because he's vocal about it. Some people don't love the vocalness from a fan perspective, but I think the players and coaches do. Is all I'll say about that.
I agree.
So he's a well-respected official. He's been around for a long time, and he takes the action right then and there and decides that's going to be the end of the night for Tortorella. That's it. You're just done. Bench minor, game misconduct. Now, I've already talked to you about this because I've watched a clip I don't know how many times to basically see just about every word that Torts says in this thing. And there's the I'm not going, I'm not parts.
Yep.
There's the
Jordan
other
Belfort vibes.
Yeah, there's the other colorful parts that I don't need to repeat, but you can obviously lip read. We're a family show.
My favorite was the NBC sports replay just blurring towards his mouth because they had to.
I think that the one that's on YouTube that's from Sportsnet is not, by the
correct.
way. So,
that is correct.
So that's which by the way, when this whole thing comes down, that's the video I used in the story to embed into the story. That's definitely the one I used. But you can see at one point in time, so like you can lip read all the other colorful things he says, but at one point in time, you can see that one of the linesmen must say something to him about like, you got to go or something like that. And he kind of sits there and gives you like a huh? Like what? Like you can see him gesture like that. Like what are you trying to say? And
Big
then
time, yeah.
And
what
then
do you mean?
And his next two lines are, tell him to come over here then. I want to talk to him before I leave. Because Macaulay's on the other side of the ice the whole time.
Yep.
So he wants a word, and he's not getting a word. And obviously this doesn't happen. He doesn't get to talk to him. He eventually leaves and walks down the tunnel.
Yep.
So he's, I think you said it. I mean, it's on the screen anyway for people who are watching on YouTube, but if it hasn't been said, we'll say it. Tortorella has been suspended for 2 games and fined $50,000.
Yep. By the way, in my eyes here, he got 1 game for refusing to leave the ice. He got 1 game because Dan Hilferty said he'd pay the fine. And then the fine was an extra $25,000 because it was the CEO saying it.
Maybe. Anyway, so here's the thing with the suspension part of this, okay? Because it feels like this is something that doesn't happen a lot, and in most cases, you're right. But like you even asked me, like we were texting back and forth about this during the game, and you even asked me, like, how often does this, like, how often this happens? And suddenly
you said hardly ever. And then I did a little Google search, and all of a sudden,
and then suddenly we're finding out that it happened.
Year.
Right, it happened to Greg Cronin in Anaheim. It happened to Jay Woodcroft in Edmonton. Who was the other one?
Keefe.
Well, Sheldon Keefe was just last week.
Right. There was another one. Anaheim at some point. Oh,
I already said Anaheim.
You're right.
There was somebody else who did
might have been Arizona.
No, I don't remember it being Arizona. There was definitely another one somewhere in there.
Might have been against Arizona. I don't know.
Well, they regardless, somebody did say also Don Granato got fined recently. That might be it.
It was in Montreal.
What, did San Luis get kicked?
Maybe. I don't know.
I don't remember that.
The fact that it wasn't Patrick Waugh is stunning. But yeah, it has happened a bunch this year, and there has very clearly.
Well, I mean, like the first one that comes to mind, being where they were, is John Cooper got kicked out of a game last year by Wes Macaulay.
Yep. Well, and there has very clearly been a renewed initiative on, hey, if you don't respect the refs, you're out of here. And here's the thing. If we know the refs aren't going to talk, and we're never going to hear what happened, and we're never going to know exactly what John Tortorella said, and fine, whatever. I don't. Oh, it's never going to happen. I think it should, but it's not going to.
That's my next segment of this here.
My problem in the moment, in the situation, in the game, on the ice, or just off the ice, in Tortorella's case, in baseball, when you get rung, you are given your chance to say your piece. You're allowed to go out there and kick dirt across home plate and yell and scream. And as long as you don't cross any lines and you don't, MF the guy too hard.
And sometimes the guy stands there and just takes it. And sometimes the guy is shooting back at you.
Absolutely. But he allows you to, right? They don't call security and escort you out and run you away and blah, blah, blah. And Wesley. Well, it's okay. It's okay that you threw him out. It's okay that you were defending the junior referee in this situation. I understand where you're coming from. Take it like a man. Stand there and it's the
whole point of telling him to come over here.
Yes, exactly.
Right. I want to talk to him before I leave. All he's trying to do is say, listen, I'm giving you a piece of my mind if I'm gone.
Absolutely. And
that's all he's trying to say. And I know that this.
Well, I guarantee that's why he only got 2.
There is an element of this where it saves him from himself. You got that right.
Correct.
Because who knows what else could be dead. And oh, by the way, by that point, everybody knows what's happening in the building, so the cameras are all over him.
Oh, yeah.
Like we don't have it. Like from what I can gather, there's nothing on camera, as far as I know, that shows what got Wes McCauley to go over to the penalty box and say, and give him the game misconduct.
Okay.
Right. There's nothing that shows that part of it. They all of a sudden just cut to Tortorella's pissed, and they just cut to, here's Wes McCauley making the announcement and saying it's a bench minor in a game. Okay. Yep. So you don't see what it was, but you would have if he would have gone over there and let him have his moment, you know.
By the way, it's amazing how brief he is when his ego's been hurt. He throws the mic on real quick. Bench minor. No fancy stuff. No fight for fighting.
He still says it with the booming voice though, like I'm man in charge here. You know, I get
of course.
It. But anyway,
Wesley's always in charge.
So let's okay, but like here's my point. So okay, maybe getting ejected is not a new thing by any stretch because it's now happened, like you said, like 5 times this year.
Right.
But those coaches just get fined, and then that's the end of it. You know, okay, there's a fine of it.
Typically.
Right. Tortorella gets a suspension because, in the words of the release that was put out, the conduct was unprofessional and not leaving the bench after being assessed a game misconduct. Yep. And honestly, that's fair that his actions in that spot were subject to review. I understand that.
Because when your referees are in charge, you have to allow them to be in charge. When they say this is what the rule is, you have to allow them to enforce the rules.
The biggest issue is that just like an ejection in baseball, this doesn't happen just because like there's an altercation between a coach and a player on the other team or between the coaches. Like that's the rarity of it all. Like we've seen coaches getting shouting matches before, but it normally doesn't cross a line where they're like, both of you get out here. Like one of the only ones I can remember that really got to that point is Peter Laviolette and Tony Granato, right? Like
classic.
That's the situation where it's like, hey, okay, we're really pushing it here with this. Or you can go with what was it? Patrick Waugh and Bruce Boudreau.
Yep.
Had the pushing match between
Patrick Waugh's first game in Colorado.
I think so. Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like that's the type of stuff that usually escalates it a little bit. Like, okay, we got to get these coaches out of here because they're literally ready to go at it with each other, kind of thing.
Fist fight.
Right.
Yes.
So it doesn't happen because of that. Usually, right? It happens because, like, same thing. Like that's what I'm saying. Same thing in baseball. You don't have a manager doesn't get run because he has a problem with something that the other team necessarily did,
right?
Like, and he's going after that guy on the team. He's going to the officiating of it, and it always comes down to the officiating. It happens because there's a problem with it, and Wes McCauley issues the game misconduct and just stands there waiting for Tortorella to leave. And this is what he's arguing. Like, I want to talk to you before I leave. And in that, like, the problem I have with the whole thing is that in the case of a suspension to a player, when a player gets suspended, we get an explanation.
Yep.
We get, we
get a whole video most of the time.
And I guess you could say that citing the refusal to leave as grounds for the suspension is giving you an explanation. Yeah. But I'd still like to hear from Wes McCauley and all this. And why did he get kicked out in the first place? What did he say that crossed the line for you? Because without that, there's no accountability. That's where the suspension becomes kind of ridiculous because there's no way for anybody to know what forced the ejection, and the NHL doesn't have to explain it. Meanwhile, the inconsistency of what happens with player suspensions is really the biggest joke of it all, because a player, they won't suspend players or they issue the maximum fine of $5,000 for conduct on the ice that is literally intent to injure or could seriously impact a player's future health.
And be assault in a court of law.
Right. But a coach said something that hurt somebody's feelings and it's worth 2 games and a $50,000 fine. That's the part that I don't get. And by the way, every other sport, the NBA does it, the NFL does it, Major League Baseball does it. You know what happens when stuff like this happens? There's a pool reporter that gets to go and ask the official questions. What happened with this call? What was this about? What was that about? And you get an answer. It's one guy, like one person goes and does the whole thing for everybody. It becomes a generalized report that one person gets the whole report.
And it's even more granular than that. Like, even like I said, like on the ice, at least in baseball, the umpire has the decency to stand next to the coach and take the verbal beating. Whether he chooses to engage or not, some guys stone face it and stare out towards center field. Some guys get right back into it. Some guys kind of scoff and blow their point off. But all of them stand right there, right in front of them,
Right.
and they take some amount of accountability, even if it's, I told you to leave, now get out.
Right.
They take some amount of face-to-face accountability and some amount of responsibility for what they're doing.
Sure. And that's
and in the current situation, they take none. Wes skated to the other side. What's John Tortorella going to do? Jump on the ice? That'll get him 20 games.
Well, exactly. Like there's an element, and I get, look, it's only 2 games, so it does not add up at all to what happened the time that he went, after the start of the game between Vancouver and Calgary, where he decided
he tried to storm the Calgary, or the
basically
Vancouver
tried to go after the coach.
One
Because,
of the craziest videos online, by the way.
Well, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that was the last suspension he had.
Okay.
Fine wise, I doubt it. He's been fined 12 times before this. He's been fined 12 times before this, and I'm not bothering to try to look up all 12. But
John Tortorella's got his fine fund well funded, I hope.
Well, in this case, I don't think he's paying anything.
You're right, Dan Hilferty.
I think Dan Hilferty's saying, I got this covered, guys.
At least he offered to.
Oh, I think he's standing by that. Absolutely. You don't get a full statement about it either. Like, you know what I mean? Like he's sitting there going, Tort stood with the team, and I support that 1,000%.
He literally said, I love what Torts did. Amazing. You don't hear that from CEOs very often.
Remember when Dan Hilferty started this whole new era thing and said he wasn't going to be Ed Snyder? He's kind of gradually morphing into Ed Snyder 2.0 every day.
And now I hope he stays a little bit further away from the day-to-day hockey decisions than Ed Snyder may have.
No,
generally speaking,
because I hear what you're saying. I think you've got him where you want him, because it's like he comes out and he's been good. Like, at this point now, this is okay. We don't have video of this one. This was because Al Morganti just posted on social that it was like, I had a conversation with him, and he said this. Right. Like, I wish we had video, but remember when we went back to the whole Cutter Gauthier thing, and we cross-referenced, well, Danny was doing a press conference and Jonesy went on the TV broadcast.
The all-out blitz.
Right.
Yeah.
And Hilferty was on Snow the goalie, and Hilferty dropped, say, well, if you don't want to play in, we want people who want to play in Philadelphia, right? Like all that stuff. So that's twice now that you've stepped forward and we're like, listen, when it comes down to it, I don't have to know anything about making the day-to-day hockey decisions. I don't even have to do anything with it, but I'll stand up and I'll say, you better want to play here, and I'll stand by the coach, and I'll pay the fine, and I'll do this.
I'm kind of surprised Dan Hilferty didn't get fined. Separately.
I think it's all collective at this point anyway. The money would have gone to the same place anyway. So as far as they're concerned, the way they looked at it was, and at the end of the day, like you said, I do think there's a potential chance that refusing to leave the bench was 1 game worth, and throwing
publicly announcing that John Tortorella won't be paying the fine
before it was out there. Sure. I don't think they're not going to go back and change it. If they had said it's 1 game and a $50,000 fine, and after the fact they go,
they wouldn't tack on another.
1 game is what it is, but I'm paying the fine for him because that's how much I support that guy, right?
They wouldn't tack on another, but before it's been announced, come on, Dan.
No, I don't. It's come on anything. It didn't make. I don't think he should have been I don't understand where suspensions come from for stuff like this when there's worse things that happen within a game that don't get anything. Again, your feelings were hurt because somebody said something bad to you
about your coworker,
right? About I understand that, but I understand that background of it because we see this with veteran officials all the time. If it's a newer guy and he makes a mistake, they're going to try to be a little bit protective of it. And let's put it this way, it's the same thing you would want from somebody else. You know what I mean? Like if you're a player and the young guy makes a mistake or the young guy's getting picked on, here comes the grizzled veteran to come in and be like, you go through me first before you take him on.
Even just in your real job, like the person who trains you, if they're a good employee, they tend to take care of you and watch your back a little bit. And maybe the first time you screw up, they take the fall for it because it's less of a big deal. But that's exactly what Wes was doing. And I understand.
Yeah, I understood the whole purpose. It was just,
the ego trip of it all.
I know.
Wes, come on, dog.
Well, because that's what it comes across as in first of all, in a game that's unraveling by the second.
You know what? And even if you want to give Tortorella 2 for unsportsmanlike, like that is within your discretion as the official. If he crossed some sort of line somewhere and you want to give them a 2-minute, that's fine. You don't have to kick him out of the game too. Like 10 minutes into the game. Like when we talk about player suspensions, we talk about the fact that, oh, well, it happened early. So the fact that he got kicked out of this game kind of is like a game. I mean, if that's the logic, then John Tortorella is getting almost 3 games for this.
I was just about to say that because I'm trying to Google some of the, like, really quick to Google some of the other ones that have happened.
Okay.
Because
you're talking about this year?
Yeah. Well, because one of them, like, I think the Sheldon Keefe one, for example, isn't there like 2 minutes and 50 seconds left in the game, if that?
Something like that.
So it's like, okay, by the end of the night, you've had enough. You know, there's 3 minutes left in the game. You've had enough. You're teeing off on it. Like I thought it was a big deal last year when John Cooper got kicked out of a game by Wes McCauley, no less. And it was the last minute of the second period. And you're like, he's gone for the whole third.
Yep.
Like,
right. And this is that like, plus another whole period and a half.
Right. So I'm trying to see if,
the game was already, on its way out of reach. So I'm not blaming the loss on that, obviously. But you're kicking their coach out and putting them on the penalty kill. Like, you're kind of finishing them off. Like, the game ends at that point for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, so I'm gonna turn I'm gonna turn my volume down on the phone so I can actually see the clip. Okay, so Cronin got kicked at late second period.
Okay.
So it's not like it's like this. I think this is by far the earliest one of the year.
Right.
Like, first period is pretty unheard of.
Well, I wonder if they're trying to lay down the law that, like, heading into the playoffs, this kind of thing isn't going to be tolerated.
The problem is that you also set a precedent for continuing a lack of accountability too. Like,
that is true.
Like that. Like, what's one of the things that people, especially like it's a baseball thing again, but what's one of the things people in baseball cannot stand when it comes to things like this? If you're not with like a pitcher throws a pitch that hits a guy and they know there's some bad blood between the teams and they don't issue a warning and they just go, nope, gone. And you're sitting there going, seriously? Like, it's the second inning. A ball got away from him. Probably he's just trying to set the tone for the at bat. He's trying to pitch the guy wisely. He hits the guy and you don't even issue a warning about it.
And you chuck my starting pitcher 22 pitches into his start.
Right. Or whatever the case may be. And it's like, you're like, and what you're going to sit there and say as the reasoning after the game is we didn't want it to get out of hand or whatever, but you can try to calm the temperature a little bit with a warning there. Hey, listen, we know stuff's going on. Let's huddle. Yep. Warnings for everybody. We're not putting up with this today. Okay. Next guy who does it. Well, you get the immediate heave ho.
And I think that's what the Hathaway misconduct was supposed to be.
Again, though, I think it's the softest example possible in a game where that happens so many times. But
I'm just saying, I think that Hathaway suspend or the Hathaway
you know what though
came with all right, well, this is your warning shot here. He's just getting to 10, and then 30 seconds later, Tortorella mouths off.
I have one issue with where you're trying to go with it, and it's the sense that.
And I'm just playing the other side of it. Like,
I get where you're
obviously absurd.
No, I get where you're coming from. Like, here's kind of where I don't like the comparison though, is if Hathaway's jawing off and then is doing stuff like that, then I understand, like, we got to give guys 10s just to calm everything down.
They kind of were. The whole bench had been giving it to the officials since the call.
The part that I don't like about that though is that basically, again, if you turn around and say this sets a precedent for if you're on an official's case from early in the game,
Yep.
Like, are we just going to start seeing coaches kicked out of games 10 minutes in all the time now because because it's clear you're going to have a bad night? Like,
it's wild because sometimes it works for you, sometimes it works against you. Like, Craig Berube, Stanley Cup Finals 2019. After I think it was game 2 or game 3, complains about the officials. They got every call the rest of the series. It changed the entire tide of the series. They said he came out and said, "Oh, the Bruins are getting away with everything," and for the rest of the series, the Bruins didn't get away with anything.
And you know what? But you know what part of the difference is with that?
Okay,
you're saying he did it after the game, though.
Yep.
Okay,
Correct.
so he does it
not
in the media.
Screaming at him on the bench,
and
not making
no,
him look silly.
Right. Well, no, they still don't like that. I'm sure, and I'm sure
Of
he got
course.
fined for it. But sure, maybe it changes things around a little bit. Like, remember something about the officiating in not just. We're using the NHL as the bigger example because obviously that's what we're talking about here. But there's been cases of this. Think about the Tim Peel thing for a second. No, seriously, that on a hot mic, they're gonna say, I had to get a call in on them. Yep. So that there's some element of gamesmanship there.
Yep. Oh, why does every game end with 2 penalties for each team in the first or second period, and then nothing in the third?
Well, like, here's the other thing too.
Come on, man.
I'm watching that game in that first period. To that point, I'm going, are we trying to make up for penalty minutes that weren't called in the Flyers Panthers game because they let so much go in that
murder. When I said playoff style
both sides,
win,
by the way, like
right.
I'm not trying to this is not a homer card here. Both sides. That was a horribly officiated game because you didn't call enough stuff.
When I said playoff style win, that's what I meant. I meant the fact that
I hoped
it was a playoff style win, and the fact that the referees didn't bring their whistles with them out for the third period.
I hear you. So that's the only thing for me where I stand with this type of stuff is like, it just bothers me how like the idea that you could sit there and say it's like you could sit there and make it that it sets a precedent for if we just don't like what they're saying, we'll just start kicking guys out.
We can just throw you out, and we don't even have to
explain, and we don't have to answer a question about it. Yep.
We don't even have to tell you what they said. They said something
we don't
like. They said something disrespectful.
No, right. Well, and here's the thing. I don't even care about the part where they're kicking people out per se because it's happened a little bit more frequently lately.
Of course, if you're gonna do it, be consistent.
It's now going to set a precedent where like, and look,
nothing sets a precedent. It's the NHL. What do you mean? What do you mean this is going to set a precedent?
I wonder if it does eventually though set something for like, hey, they're more open to suspending guys now.
Who's the commissioner of the NHL?
Yeah, I know, and I said that to you in the chat.
Then they will continue to do whatever they please.
Oh, I hear you. Like you know what I mean by setting a precedent with it, though. Is that the idea? It's the idea that eventually, how many times does somebody have to like? And listen, there's an element of this where like we said, 5th coach ejected this season, right, from a game.
Yep.
Now you don't hear a whole hell of a lot about Greg Cronin or Jay Woodcroft got fired later. Well, Jay Woodcroft got fired, so like you get that point of it. And Sheldon Keefe kind of for the stage of the game when he got kicked. I'll just
he needed to fire that team.
Right.
Up.
All right. Yeah. I said what I had to say. You want to send me to the bench? It's fine. There's 3 minutes left.
Sheldon Keefe, that was the same as a guy fighting with 2 minutes left. Like the exact
right. Like I'll just get out of here. It's fine. Yep. There's an element where you picked the wrong guy to mess with because John Tortorella's answer was, no, I'm staying right here.
I would like to speak to this man.
It was beyond the speaking to him thing because before they got to that part, he's just in like the way that he emphatically is yelling, no, I'm not. Like,
I'm not sure John Tortorella knows why he got run.
It doesn't even matter if he knows why he got run or not. He was literally using that as an opportunity, like, play, you go.
Yep.
You know,
and
It all like, by the way, it only looks more comical because of the fact like he had the hand surgery recently. The hand surgery is not comical at all, but watching him with the cast on his arm, pointing at these guys like
I'll break my other hand. Get over here.
Well,
I know it's not broken. But you know
I genuinely thought about that afterwards because I'm like, he's off his rocker right now in terms of how pissed off he is. Don't go into the room and like flip a table and break something. Like seriously, like. Somebody better grab a hold of him and like hope he settles down because
somebody was in that locker room.
I know. You know what I mean, though. I was just saying it from a standpoint of like,
well, but regardless,
but like you know what I'm saying though. If you've ever been that mad at something,
absolutely,
you're not completely in control sometimes, and it's like, well, I'm just gonna, I'm breaking this thing. I'm throwing something. I want to punch something. Like you don't have control sometimes, and that's he like whatever. I did think it was funny, by the way, because apparently, like, this was the kickoff on 32 Thoughts earlier.
Yes. It was also the kickoff on Steve Dangle podcast on today's episode, if you were interested.
For what it's worth, though, by the way, as far as I know anyway, I didn't listen to Dangle's podcast, but I did see tweets that he had about the situation. Everybody was on Tortorella's side, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
About, like, Well, they don't.
We all know it's a power trip.
Because they go because they never say anything. So this is really a situation where you should hear from the official.
For the record, Dangle has been anti-Wes McCauley for about 3-4 years at this point. He's hated. He hated 5 minutes for fighting. Like, he hates all of it
because it depends on how you take it. And
because we're allegedly professionals playing in a professional league. What are we doing?
No, I'll tell you exactly what it is, and it's a very relevant line right now because once it was out there, people used it against him in a lot of situations. It goes back to remember the thing with Jack Hughes not long ago.
Yeah, people
pay to watch me play, so people don't pay to watch the officials. So
right.
If he's going to take it to that level of showmanship, is it comical sometimes? Yeah, it can be, but it gets old after a while.
Yep.
And and it didn't matter in that situation. And to be honest, in that situation, stuff like that shows more lack of control than you think it does. Like you think you're diffusing the situation, and you might be for the game.
You're just showing how thin-skinned you are.
But you might be diffusing the situation for the game itself. What ends up happening though is that like this happened Saturday. We'll go into the it's going to get talked about Tuesday as well, because it's going to get talked about the second that you look down and you go, hey, guess what?
And then you go into the biggest coaching. And then you go into the biggest media market in the sport.
That's true. So like Thursday night's home. It's
home. Okay. You play against the biggest media market in the sport.
That's also talked about it. Whose coach got tossed a week ago.
Yep.
Like
I think this is going to serve as motivation for the guys in the room. And I think we talked about the fact that you have to come out there and absolutely pump San Jose. And I think, honestly, as we kind of switch over to looking ahead here, I think we can kind of skim over that San Jose game, because here's the truth. If you come out here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, roughly 5.5 weeks until the playoffs. If you beat San Jose, if you don't beat San Jose, if you come out on Tuesday night and put up a lackluster performance, you might as well book your vacations for the week after the season ends, because you're not making the playoffs. If you can't get up for this game against the San Jose Sharks, the worst team since the Colorado Avalanche 5 or 6 years ago, the 3 days after your coach just got run out in the most embarrassing ego play a referee has made in a very long time, if you can't get fired up for this game, consider retirement. I don't like Tyson Forrester. If you can't get up for this game, pack it in, kid. You have to come out and beat the San Jose Sharks. I didn't expect to look at the March 12th game against the San Jose Sharks as a must win, but as we sit here today, it kind of is.
I hear you. And look, I'm not trying to overlook the San Jose game at all. Like, you just need to win it. You just need to win it. The Toronto game is interesting. Like, you've got a couple of games here where I look at Toronto, by the way. So Toronto's 7-3 in their last 10. So they've definitely turned it up a little bit. And by the way, you know when the Leafs had a game last?
Okay.
They haven't played since Saturday.
Okay.
And they won't have until they come.
Really? They do not play between then and now. Interesting.
Yeah. So I don't know what's better, the 4 days off between games, or the idea that the Flyers also haven't played since Saturday and play the worst team in the league on Tuesday.
I'd rather get that extra game in. I think at this point in the season, I think I'd rather get that extra game in.
I hear you there.
Especially after you get pumped 7-0. Like, I think you want to come out and get some aggravation.
But for what it's worth, so I just told you, by the way, so 7-3-0 in the last 10 for Toronto.
Yep. But
their last 4 is 2-2. So there's an element of factor. Oh, by the way, the 2 wins, by the way, 3-2 against Montreal. I have to check. No, it wasn't an overtime game. It was a late regulation goal by John Tavares, and a 2-1 overtime win against Buffalo that was Austin Matthews, I believe.
Right. Well, and as we look at these games, right, we skim over San Jose, like we said, that's a game you should probably win. But looking at Toronto and even looking ahead to Boston on Saturday.
Well, can I give you an interesting tidbit about Boston right now?
Okay.
This is pretty close to being safe to say we can just ruled this one because we're recording this at a time right now as we get to this whole portion where the earlier games in the NHL on Monday night are wrapping up
by the Blues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
My point being, get the goaltending and play a solid game. It's not like it's impossible.
By the way, little news out of Devils Rangers. Matt Rempe's getting suspended.
Oh, am I gonna have to see a clip of something at some point?
I already sent it to you in the.
Oh, is that what this is?
Yep.
Well,
Take a look at it.
I'm not looking at that. I'm just gonna. I bet you it's trending. It's trending. So let me
look up Matt Rempe's name, and while you do that, I'll mention the fact that you play Toronto on Thursday, you play Boston on Saturday.
By the way, I'm already going to start with this. I haven't seen whatever he did that's probably suspension worthy, but the exit from the ice with the wave is also going to get you in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
That's fair to say. Okay,
he's going to get games. Yeah.
Hang on a minute. So I didn't catch where he was on the ice at first, so I totally missed it.
Okay.
He's down.
I assume they'll show. The
wait. Okay, hold on. I'm my bad on this. So as I'm watching it, the initial angle, you don't even see it yet.
Person? Okay.
No. You don't even see it. He comes into view and it's already happened.
I assume they'll show you another.
Yeah. So I have to wait for a replay. Ooh, by the way, so I had totally forgotten about this part, by the way. So they cut to, I haven't seen a replay yet, but Curtis McDermott's on the ice for the Devils in that situation too, and I had forgotten they had acquired him. By the way, that's not a guy you want to mess with either.
I mean, yeah.
McDermott's a pretty tough dude.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
By the way, for, the Devils have been beaten up by some injuries. They've also fallen off a little bit. Jonas Siegenthaler is the guy who gets hit. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Multiple games, 5+ in-person hearing. I'm fully expecting
this side angle is going to be worse, probably.
It's nasty.
Ooh, yeah.
It's chicken wing. It's elbow to the head.
It's not even an elbow to the head. It's an elbow straight to the jaw.
Yeah.
I mean, it's straight off his jaw.
Well, I mean, your jaw's connected to your head.
And then he waves as he goes off. That's not going to endear people to him.
He's gonna get the absolute book thrown at him.
This is comical, by the way. Because okay, I get it now. I understand why this is happening.
Okay.
Because of Matt Rempe.
Oh, yeah.
Scott Stevens is trending on social. Do you know why?
Okay.
The first thing that shows up, Devils fans, Rempe should be banned from the league. He how could he even think of elbowing someone? Also, Devils fans, we love Scott Stevens.
That is pretty funny.
I mean, different era.
Absolutely different rule set. Pre OG lockout.
Okay, so good. Well, so good to know. By the way, the Rangers are still going to probably win that game unless something changed.
Did.
Oh, they already
did.
Won that game. Never mind.
The Devils or the Rangers have beaten the Devils, which is good for the Flyers. At this point in time. You're not catching
the Devils are no, and the Devils are not really a factor as much anymore anyway. There is a bigger one in progress right now. Winnipeg is up 2-0 on the Capitals, which is a bigger deal. And this is, by the way, this is exactly why I said for somewhat with the Capitals, because you look at the teams they got to play this week on the road, no less.
They're on a tough one too. Yeah.
This is where I think their ship sinks for good, and it's starting with
right. They have a tough week as well. Yeah.
With this. And in about an hour, we all turn our eyes to the Islanders playing the Kings. I get
big Kings fans. Absolutely. But so the Flyers do have a couple of big games as well. I know we talked about San Jose. If you show up against Toronto and Boston, it's pretty simple. If you show up like the team that showed up against Florida, you have a really good shot at getting 2 or 3 points there. I'm not necessarily saying you beat both of those teams. You have a shot to stay in both games. You keep yourself in probably both games. You have a chance to win one of them. If you show up like the team that played Tampa Bay, you're not getting a point. It's kind of that simple. And if you do it in one and don't do it in the other, well, then flip a coin. And it's probably not good.
Let me just play a little bit of kind of just hypotheticals here.
Yeah.
Go back to even before the Florida game for a second and just start it off by looking at those 10 games and assuming that one of the possibilities, legitimately, even with a game like San Jose in the middle, one of the possibilities is you don't win a game, period. You don't even get a point. It always, that always exists, right? Like you're playing a bunch of really good teams. There is that one team in there that you should beat, but if you're down bad, and you don't, can't get out of your own way, it can always be a loss. You have to consider that. Okay, so they quiet it down a little bit with you beat Florida. Okay, good. So you got 2 points right off the bat. You're not going to get shut out through 10 games. It's not going to like send you off the cliff right away. Yeah, the Tampa game was bad. You have a chance to bounce back against a really beatable team in San Jose. And you can kind of start over with those 7 afterwards. Now, you don't get a break in the 7, but you start to piece together like I keep coming back to get me 6 points, and I don't care how. You could win 2 games and take 2 to overtime, and I would tell you that's okay. Potentially.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'll take it another way. I'll take 3 and 2 like that. Win 3 of the 7, 2 go to overtime, 2 are regulation, and you live with
it. Drag 4 to overtime.
I mean, however you got to get it. Okay, and let's talk about that for 1 second, by the way, because I don't care how you got to get the points. The team that's chasing you for 3rd place right now that could pass you for 3rd place at like quite literally as soon as by tomorrow morning.
Right by the time this show drops.
Has 14 overtime, has 14 loser points.
Yeah, they're terrible. They're terrible. They're what, 28 and 34?
Okay. I also want to say something about that too, because like you're seeing people who are sitting here saying
34. Stuff. I'm sorry.
No, but hang on. You're seeing people who are sitting there turning around going like, well, look at what they've been like since Patrick Waugh and blah, blah, blah. And what the record is. And I looked it up. Patrick Waugh's record with the Islanders so far is 10-5-3, which is decent, honestly.
Very solid.
I give him credit.
Yeah.
Do you realize
especially because I think they lost like 3 of the first 4 or something like that. Like,
but that's the caveat I'm giving. That's the caveat I'm giving you. They had to go on a 6-game winning streak to get out of the fact that they were 4-5-3 to start it all.
Well,
that's turning things around.
Well, I call that turning things around. I think that first little stretch is Waugh getting in there and getting his systems in place.
And I can get that for like 3 or 4 games. The fact that it went on for 12 before they really got rolling, though, that's the part that's kind of where I argue. And not to mention the fact that, like, yes, you've gotten six wins in a row, and the last 2 have been beaten up on bottom feeders. Like, that's why I said I don't take anything away from the fact that they had a great game against Boston. I don't take away from the fact that they've beaten, like, since Waugh's taken over as coach, they've beaten Dallas twice. That's obviously a really good win.
Big wins, yeah.
You know, like, I'm not saying they haven't beaten anybody. I am also looking at the fact that in the course of the week where they've managed to close this gap a little bit, their 2 most recent opponents are San Jose and Anaheim. And I can go look at where those teams are ranked in the league and go, oh, yeah, okay, that makes a whole lot of sense now.
Right, exactly.
30-31. Gee, I wonder how those teams lost.
Yep.
And don't get me wrong, like, the Flyers have their chance with this stuff too. The Flyers still have San Jose on the schedule. They got 1 more against Chicago. They play Columbus 1 more time. They play Montreal twice.
Right. There are still plenty of, I'm not going to say free because it's the NHL, but there are plenty of gettable points remaining on the Flyers schedule for sure. And they will, like I said, they'll have a shot at a couple of those this week. Before we get out of here, I do want to touch on some of the moves from around the league because my goodness, what a trade deadline it was. I do have it up here. The big move, I'm gonna skip. There were a couple of decent smaller moves.
I was gonna say I'm gonna try to pull up the cap friendly list.
Usually, so I have it here.
I'm just to look at it in front of me also. So go ahead. You can get started though.
So the first big move was probably,
well, for what it's worth, by the way, are you trying to pull big moves that weren't on Friday specifically?
I'm gonna throw a couple in leading up to Friday, but then also talking about some big ones on Friday. So Anthony Mantha goes on, I think, Tuesday. Tarasenko, Sean Walker, the aforementioned Bo and Byram Casey Middlestats 1-for-1 swap. Which
that was a deal.
That might be one we talk about in the offseason because that's a trade, man. We'll get into that one. Wenberg goes to the New York Rangers. They pick up a little bit of center depth. The Flyers retain a piece on the Hannafin move, but he ends up in Vegas. I'm kind of scrolling through here real quick. A couple little minor deals.
Joel Edmondson going to Toronto was one that was a little bit.
Yep. Anthony Duclair going to the Lightning was kind of on a similar page. And then we get to the big ones. And this Thursday night, the first really big trade of the deadline drops. And we get some pretty hefty word that it's coming down kind of before the game, then maybe during the game, and there's some speculation, and it turns out that Jake Gensel is being held out of the lineup for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and
Gensel was already out with an injury.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry.
Bunting was being held.
It comes out that Michael Bunting is being held out of the lineup for the Carolina Hurricanes as part for trade-related reasons.
Well, even beyond that, also that afternoon, it was Antti Ranta, Brendan Lemieux, and Tony DeAngelo all on waivers.
Waived, yeah,
right. Which was an apparent
indicator that something's happening.
We got to clear a spot somewhere in here.
Yes,
we're doing a whole bunch of stuff. By the way, that is one Flyer element to this. By the way, not the former Flyer part. When Ranta went on waivers, the idea that if they were looking for a cheaper veteran backup, Ranta's making 1.5. Now, granted, at that point in time, that's probably when Briere's also still working on the idea of getting Gurianov or getting Johnson. So that took up a lot of whatever money they had left. But
right, but as it sits, as the deal gets done, it ends up coming out officially after the game ends. The games end because both teams played on Thursday night. Jake Gensel and Ty Smith go to Carolina in exchange for Michael Bunting, Vasily Ponomarev, Cruz Lucius, Ville Koivunen. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. My apologies. A 2024 conditional second round pick that is currently a Philadelphia Flyers pick. A 2024 fifth round pick that is currently a Carolina pick. Both have some conditions on them. They can do some shifting around. We don't need to get into the details on that.
I don't mind doing the details on that because the conditions are super easy. The second becomes a first if the Canes make the final, and the fifth becomes the fifth only is actually being given to the Penguins.
Carolina wins the Stanley
Carolina wins the cup.
Yep.
That's pretty simple stuff. Do you want to keep moving up?
Yeah, big move for Carolina to add some piece.
I was about to say not the only Carolina move because you got Evgeny Kuznetsov as well.
Man, take a drink if you saw this one coming.
Maybe not the specific location, but I wasn't shocked about hearing Kuznetsov's name in trade rumors once he was waived.
It was wild watching the Carolina Hurricanes do this much business with the Metropolitan Division because they get Evgeny Kuznetsov from the Washington Capitals in exchange for a 2025 third round pick. Kuznetsov had just come back from the player assistance program, had just cleared waivers, and has joined the Carolina Hurricanes and is playing on their power play and looks to be kind of part of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. A couple of other minor ones if we want to keep scrolling through the list here, by the way.
Kyle Okposo to
Florida. Going to Florida.
Chad Ruedel to the New York Rangers.
That one wasn't as big of a deal to me. The Toffoli one's probably the next biggest one. Toffoli to Winnipeg for 2 picks. By the way, again, though, like if you're looking at Toffoli, and Toffoli's had a decent year, right? Like all things like in there.
Yeah.
It was
he adds some scoring to that Jets team that needs it.
I know he does. My point is the cost is a third this year and a second next year. That's it. Like
the mighty have fallen on Tyler Toffoli, and
I know they have, but I'm also saying this is what makes you think about what Danny Briere is going through.
Absolutely.
This is what kind of things teams are going for.
Yep.
Jason Zucker to Nashville for 2024. That kind of is surprising, by the way.
Yep. Patrick Maroon to the Bruins.
Yes, that was
Yep. We talked about the Erik Johnson and the Denis Gurianov deal. Andrew Peeke goes to Boston.
That's an interesting swap, by the way.
Jacob Zaboral and a third.
That's an interesting swap.
Yeah.
The Devils getting Jake Allen's probably the next biggest one on here too.
Matt Dumba going to Tampa Bay for a
going to Tampa swap with a 7th for a 5th.
Right, and you can argue that a 7th this year might have about the same value as a 5th in 2 years.
Right.
It's crazy.
You got
Jack
Roslovic going to the Rangers from Columbus. That was just for a conditional 4th.
The San Jose New Jersey Devil goalie swap with a 7th in there. Capo Kakinen into the Devils, Vitek Vanacek and a 7th to the San Jose Sharks.
I'm skipping that one for 1 second because there's literally almost none left.
Almost nothing else.
The only other one at that point is the Devils traded Colin Miller to the Jets as well. Their second piece of business with the Jets that day.
Yep.
Kind of interesting. I mean, if you want to mention Connor Dewar going to Toronto, but that was kind of like that's coming back down from the high
and then
it was
a non-playoff trade later too. The big trade. The San Jose Sharks. The San Jose Sharks acquired David Edstrom and a 2025 first-round pick that currently belongs to the Vegas Golden Knights. And in return, the Vegas Golden Knights acquired Tomas Hertl and
with 17% of his salary retained
for 6 years to a divisional rival.
Don't you love that?
So wait a minute. And now David Edstrom is a very, very, very good prospect, a first-round pick. I mean, Vegas throws them around like they're Halloween candy, but to most organizations, they are a valuable asset. And so, you paid some, but you got not only a guy who's going to help your team now, right? Tomas Hertl he's hurt right now, but he will be healthy at some point during the regular season. We're not going to get into the LTIR thing. It's part of the rules. If your team was doing it, you wouldn't be mad. He's going to return at some point this season. He's going to theoretically help this year's playoff run / help them get into the playoffs. And you got 2 third-round picks that they can flip later or that they can use to restock their prospects. And oh, by the way, the Sharks are such a dumpster fire of an organization that those third-round picks are very likely to be high in the third round.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
what a day for Kelly McCrimmon. What a day. And we know that this trade call happened at about 58.
There's something to be said about, like, there's a lot of factors. First of all, there's something to be said about no income tax. That helps a little bit when it comes to some things.
Yep. Playing in Vegas has some appeal to guys.
Well, they just won a Stanley Cup too. You can't deny that factor of it either.
Well,
I mean,
they won They won a Stanley Cup and lost one player in their bottom 6.
And have now added a bunch,
right, and then added Tomas Hertl and Noah Hannafin. Right. Hello. So one of the big themes of the Dangle podcast are covered to the video and the podcast and all that was, don't let your general manager gaslight you into thinking that you don't have the assets to do things like this. Sure they do. Vegas does it every year. How do you not what do you mean you can't do that? What do you mean you can't add a forward? What do you mean you can't add a defenseman? Sure you can. Look at what Vegas has done.
I'm shocked that the answer wasn't don't let your GM gaslight you into thinking you can't do deals like this, and just wasn't don't let your GM tell you trades are hard.
Well, also that's exactly my point, right? Like a year ago we had Chuck Fletcher shitting here.
It was speaking of which, by the way,
I made 17 phone calls and no one wanted to trade a second-round pick for JVR. So I gave up and got fired for it.
Do you know what's funny about all that? Seriously?
Okay.
So I'm sitting here during the course of Friday, and there wasn't really, to be honest, for most of the day, I didn't think anything was going to happen. Obviously, the 2 little minor deals, the depth deals that the Flyers made came in between 1:30 and 2 o'clock, I want to say, and somewhere shortly after 2 o'clock, right as you're kind of piecing the stories together, it's, by the way, they're done.
Yeah.
And you kind of figured that anyway. Like, it was pretty easy to tell.
Right. The Danny Briere press availability was scheduled for 3:15.
But I think it started at 10 a.m. I want to say roughly was when an NHL network ran Sportsnet's coverage of the deadline.
All-day coverage, right.
Which, by the way, so Sportsnet's coverage, by the way, involved a lounge of ex-players, the typical panel on the desk. Biz was on the panel for this too. Yeah. So they injected other pieces of it. And then they have this section called, I think it was called the boardroom, I believe is what it was called, which involves the perspective of a scout and a general manager. And the general manager, the former general manager who is sitting in on the panel, is Chuck Fletcher. And I didn't remember that Chuck Fletcher did this, even going back to I think he did this over the draft last year as part of Sportsnet's coverage too, or free agents.
Remember that?
And I had forgotten that this was a thing. Apparently,
nightmare fuel. All right,
it was just funny listening to him recount certain things. He got as they're running this thing, they're asking him questions about, so you had a situation like this, or you would deal with this, or how does a GM deal with a situation like this? And I can just think of the reactions of anybody in Philly watching this and being like, you're going to ask him how he would handle something like this. He didn't, right. Or whatever. Right. No, you get the point. So it was just, it was an interesting day. And oh, by the way, speaking of, because we've referenced 32 Thoughts a few times during the course of the show as well. That was another desk as well. That those two were just sitting on a desk. That Elliot and Jeff were just sitting on a desk.
Yep. Well,
coming in with, I found this out, I found that out, blah blah blah. Right. Sometimes getting up in the middle of the show. At one point in time, they go over there and Elliot's just sitting there by himself, and it's yep, he's sick of me already. No,
I'm sure that was a very busy phone call.
Everything was busy.
You heard the clip of Elliot Friedman talking about the fact that he was averaging 17 hours of phone time a day.
Yeah. I did
The
see
little Apple update. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Regardless, that is going to do it for this week's show. We are rolling towards the playoffs. The Flyers are hoping to make it. We're kind of white knuckling through this little 10-game stretch here. We will be back next week with more coverage on that. In the meantime, make sure to follow us on social media at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Darso. You can find us everywhere you find your podcasts, including sportstalkphilly.com. And like I said, we'll be back next Sunday. We're 20 games from the playoffs, basically. So we'll see you.